The board is returning from closed session to take up our 1 o'clock timed item. County Council will report out.
The board met with legal counsel on a piece of existing litigation, Cup versus Harris. The board authorized the defense and indemnity of the county employees who are named in that litigation. The board also had a conference with its real property negotiators and gave direction on 3 potential acquisitions. That concludes the closed session report.
Thank you, Chris. We'll move on to our, excuse me, I think 1 o'clock timed item, which is medicinal marijuana regulatory direction to staff ordinance. We are going to be receiving an update from staff, and then the board is being asked to provide direction on regulatory ordinance development and potentially a consideration of a tax ordinance. Just want to do a little bit of a premise that the board has heard this item several times in the last 12 months, so if it appears to you that we're somewhat abbreviated, it's because we've been well steeped in a lot of dialogue already. There will be a public comment time, so we're anxious to hear from everyone in the public. We do, though, want to run an efficient meeting and want to make sure that public comments are not excessively redundant, and that the board is allowed to craft something that gives us the ability to give specific direction to staff as to the direction as per a majority of the board members. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becky Riggin, who's going to start off a staff presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Wygant, members of the board. Becky Riggin from the County Executive Office, and we were here this afternoon seeking your direction on regulating medical marijuana in Placer County. Many county staff have worked on this issue over the past year, but this afternoon I'm joined by the lead staff. To my left, Brett Holt from County Counsel's Office. To my right, Josh Hunsinger, the Placer County Ag Commissioner. And to his right, George Rosasco from the Planning Division. I'd also like to introduce our consultant, David McPherson from HDL, a firm that provides tax revenue estimates for the county and all across California, and who is currently working across the state with several jurisdictions on the development of marijuana regulatory and funding approaches. David assisted staff with some of the analysis on the models that we will be presenting for your consideration today. So we'll start with a quick overview of today's presentation. We will briefly review previous board direction, discuss the changing policy arena across the state and federal levels, review some of the key highlights of the 2015 Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, provide some insights into the existing commercial industry in Placer County, share the results of the community outreach efforts, present analysis on 5 policy alternatives ranging from most to least restrictive for your board's consideration, and then staff will seek your direction on the regulatory structure for Placer County. And pending your policy direction, we will also seek your direction on a potential tax initiative that staff was asked to prepare for today. So staff have been before your board several times over the past year to discuss medical marijuana regulation in Placer County. In May 2015, your board heard testimony from residents about the challenges from irresponsible cultivation, primarily within the Sheridan area, along with comments from the Sheriff's Office on enforcement challenges under the previous legal structure that allowed collective grows of up to 99 plants per patient with the doctor's recommendation. Your board also heard testimony from the industry and patients expressing their concerns for losing the ability to cultivate for their personal needs, and also expressing their support for cleaning up the unregulated market. Your board directed a wait-and-see approach as we were anticipating passage of then-pending state law around medical marijuana, which was passed in October of 2015. In January, your board directed development of a placeholder ordinance asserting Placer's authority to self-regulate, identified the Ag Commissioner as the program lead, directed staff to begin developing a local regulatory framework, and approved staff's plan for community outreach to obtain input from the municipal advisory boards and from the broader community through the town hall meetings. So by way of background, we will provide a brief review of the changing legal landscape around marijuana policy over the past 20 years, along with a summary of the evolving relationship between the federal and state governments on this issue. This is a snapshot of the current landscape and depicts the more than 40 states where marijuana use is now permitted in some form or another. So we'll walk through this map briefly, starting with the least to most restrictive. The states in green, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and Alaska, along with the District of Columbia, are where marijuana is legal for recreational use. The states depicted in gray are those that have enacted medical marijuana laws along with decriminalization. States in orange allow marijuana medical use. Those in blue are states that have decriminalized medical use. And those in yellow, primarily in the South, are those that allow use of low THC for medical purposes. The states depicted in white have done none of this so far, and those with red stars are those that have some sort of ballot measure proposing less restrictive laws on the November ballot. California's voters were the first on this path with the passage of the Compassionate Use Act, or Prop 215, in 1996. 8 years later, the legislature passed Senate Bill 420, known as the Medical Marijuana Program Act, allowing patients with a physician's recommendation to possess 6 plants or up to half a pound of marijuana. It also established nonprofit cooperatives, known as dispensaries, to allow legal access to a Schedule I drug. These laws were passed with the intent of providing reasonable access to medical marijuana for patients with a medical recommendation for its use. However, these laws were loosely constructed and resulted in broad interpretation on the conditions under which marijuana access, use, production, and distribution were to be allowed. Some of the more notable concerns centered on the easy access to physician recommendations, which essentially came to serve as a get-out-of-jail-free card, and is one of the aspects that allowed cultivation to proliferate across not only Placer County, but also across the state. During the same time frame in California, a number of Supreme Court cases upheld Prop 215 protections, and additional actions by both the legislature and the voters, such as Senate Bill 1449 and Proposition 47, continued to reduce the criminal penalties associated with marijuana cultivation and use. So those actions, combined with the lack of a comprehensive statewide regulatory framework, left a patchwork of locally adopted measures to address significant public health and safety, land use, zoning, and environmental concerns, some of which are depicted on this slide. The list on the left summarizes key public safety concerns. The list on the right summarizes key environmental concerns. Regardless of the individual perspective on medical marijuana, few argue with the conclusions of the 2015 Blue Ribbon Commission's report on options for regulating marijuana in California, that the policies of the past 20 years have contributed to a large illicit market of cultivation and retail sale, and a quasi-legal medical cannabis system that is largely unregulated, untaxed, and untenable. During this, moving on to the next one. Okay, so in light of the confusion and negative impacts that resulted from this poorly implemented state law nearly 20 years ago, the California legislature passed the comprehensive statewide regulation on medical marijuana known as the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, or MRSA. The 3 interlocking bills established 3 distinct regulatory responsibilities. AB 243 provides oversight and control of the marijuana cultivation. And because the state determined that regulated marijuana is now an agricultural product, it designated the California Department of Food and Agriculture, along with local county ag commissioners, with the responsibility for local regulatory oversight. It also establishes a fund to assist local governments in addressing environmental issues. AB 266 establishes the Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation within the Department of Consumer Affairs, which serves as the primary regulatory agency overseeing manufacturing, distribution, and sales. And finally, Senate Bill 643 establishes the tax fiscal framework, the track and trace program that tracks cultivation from seed to sale in order to minimize black market diversion to youth and across state borders. And very importantly, this bill also tightens physician standards for issuing medical recommendations. As states continue to move toward less restrictive laws regarding marijuana, questions arise on the apparent inconsistencies between the state and federal legislation and the preemptive power of federal over state drug laws. Under the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, marijuana remains scheduled as a Schedule I substance, the highest of 5 levels of control, along with heroin and LSD. The CSA makes it unlawful to possess, cultivate, manufacture, distribute, or dispense marijuana. And while Congress has the power to preempt state law under the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, aspects of the federal system of government along with the provisions of the CSA, allow considerable autonomy for states to define crimes and to affix their punishments, including allowing drug-related activities prohibited by federal law. So in addition to regulating medical marijuana, MRSA also brings California into compliance with the policy guidance of the Department of Justice and contains components that may serve as an enforcement framework for a potential voter initiative to legalize marijuana for adult use, should that be the will of the voters this November. This slide highlights several key actions taken by the federal government to allow states that have enacted marijuana laws and regulatory frameworks to experiment with developing more effective approaches to regulating marijuana. Your board memo describes these actions in some detail, but Brett Holt from County Counsel's Office is going to summarize some of the finer points of this cooperative approach between the feds and the states, and the trust but verify enforcement approach being taken by the Department of Justice.
I was asked to analyze the issue of the federal and state law, and after analyzing it, I came to the conclusion that local state laws do not violate and are not in conflict with the Controlled Substances Act. There have been at least 4 separate cases that have held that. If you, as a legislative body, institute regulation at this point, you will not be in violation of the state Federal Controlled Substances Act. The Federal Controlled Substances Act is enforced by the Federal Attorney General, and Section 903, if you could switch to slide 31.
Okay, almost there. Well,
Okay.
okay.
So
Sorry, we don't have it.
yeah, that's okay. So Section 903 of the Controlled Substances Act specifically states that unless there's a positive conflict between the state law that regulates controlled substances and the Federal Controlled Substances Act, then there is no preemption. And as I said, in 4 different areas in California dealing with the CUA, Compassionate Use Act, and also with the medical marijuana program, courts have found consistently that there is no conflict. The last case was Kirby versus the County of Fresno. It just came out in 2015, providing that exact same ruling. So in addition, the anti-commandeering rule, as provided by the 10th Amendment, sets forth that state government, state bodies are not simply regulatory agencies for the federal government, that the federal government enforces and regulates their programs, the state has their programs. In Qualified Patients Association versus City of Anaheim, in addressing this issue, stated, just as the federal government may not commandeer state officials for federal purposes, a city may not stand in for the federal government and rely on purported federal preemption to implement federal legislation policy that differs from corresponding express state legislation concerning medical marijuana. Citing People versus Tillcook, the California courts long ago recognized that the state courts do not enforce the federal criminal statutes. The state tribunals have no power to punish crimes against the laws of the United States as such. The same act may, in some instances, be an offense against the laws of both the state law and the federal law. And it is only as an offense against the state laws that it can be punished by the state in any event. So I was asked to address that issue, and that's what I focused on.
Thank you.
Yes?
I have a question. Has any public official that has made a decision on this particular issue ever been arrested for violating federal law?
No. Not that I'm aware of. In fact, there's an immunity statute on point. It is 21 U.S.C. Section 885D, which provides that any officer of any state, territory, or political subdivision thereof, the District of Columbia, or any possession of the United States, who shall be, there should be immunity, who shall be lawfully engaged in enforcement of any law or municipal ordinance relating to controlled substances. So there's a statute directly on point, and there's also case law dealing with that specific issue as to whether or not a local official could be considered an aider and abetter of violating the federal law. And the answer is no. They could not. If you regulate this issue today, you would not be in violation of federal law.
So this idea that we've been told that we're violating our constitutional oath, that has no basis in the law.
Correct.
Okay, we'll continue with the presentation then. Consistent with the direction received by your board on December 8th, 2015, staff completed extensive community outreach on regulating medical marijuana in Placer County. Presentations highlighted the current challenges with cultivation in the county, recent state and federal legislative and policy actions, and the new MRSA legislation. Staff conducted 26 community meetings, including presentations to 12 MACs, 10 of which took action, the Agricultural Commission, 2 town hall presentations in North Auburn and Rockland, presentations to Roseville, Rockland, Lincoln, Auburn, and Colfax City Councils, Criminal Justice Policy Committee, Placer County Law Enforcement, the Roseville Chamber of Commerce Government Relations Committee, Auburn Meddlers, Placer County Association of Realtors, and Roseville Coalition of Neighborhood Associations. The MACs were, presentations were provided to all MACs except in Donner Summit. And of the 12 receiving presentations, 10 took action on the following questions. Should Placer County implement zoning and land use regulations to control the location, amount, and distribution of marijuana in the unincorporated area? Should the industry bear the cost of regulation through fees and general taxes, providing that all the costs of regulating the industry have been met prior to it being used for other uses? Does the MAC support a comprehensive framework for regulation of medical marijuana to allow and regulate outdoor cultivation, allow and regulate indoor cultivation, allow and regulate dispensaries? Those MACs voting unanimously voted to recommend that the board implement zoning and land use regulations to control the location, amount, and distribution of medical marijuana in the unincorporated area, consistent with the state regulatory framework, to have the industry bear the cost of regulation through fees and general taxes, and to support the comprehensive framework for regulation, allowing and regulating both indoor and outdoor cultivation as well as dispensaries. Similar presentations were provided at town hall meetings in Auburn and Rockland. The 2 town hall meetings were well attended, with more than 100 individuals attending each meeting. And while this survey that was provided is not in any way scientific, it does provide additional input worthy of consideration. It was noted that many of the attendees at the town halls appeared to be medical marijuana patients or industry representatives. And what is noteworthy about these results then is that they overwhelmingly support regulation, with 82% stating that the industry should bear the cost of regulation through fees and taxes. During presentations to city councils, staff received a number of comments. Most councils requested your board develop regulations consistent with their city ordinances to include banning urban outdoor grows, limiting total cultivation to 50 square feet, and banning dispensaries. However, staff also received comments that should your board choose to allow and regulate commercial activities in unincorporated Placer County, that consideration be given to implementing a buffer zone along city boundaries, developing collaborative revenue sharing agreements for enforcement activities, and establishing regular planning and coordination sessions to review data on regulatory effectiveness, to monitor expenditures, and analyze long-term results. Letters from the individual city councils were included in your staff memos. We also had a very engaging conversation with the Placer County Agricultural Commission, and at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Josh to walk through input staff received there and to continue with the presentation.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Board. Several months ago, this item was brought before the Placer County Agricultural Commission for discussion. There was quite a bit of conversation going on within our traditional agricultural community, and so this item was brought forward. They were asked to consider a slightly different set of questions because they're tasked in our county ordinance with advising the board on agricultural issues. And so while we did share the MAC questions with them, they did not take action on the MAC questions, but rather the questions they were asked to consider was how the right to farm ordinance would apply should the county allow cannabis cultivation activities in the county. And then secondly, what would be the impacts on Williamson Act contracts should the county again allow some sort of cultivation activities in the county. The Agricultural Commission, after much discussion, it was a very well-attended meeting, voted to recognize medical cannabis as crop production, or to recommend that to your board, and not to limit it from the right to farm ordinance should the board allow it. And the thinking was that if the board were to allow cultivation, then Placer County should provide some sort of business certainty to those people who had complied with the regulatory system. So let's see. So what I'd like to do now is transition a little bit into some of what we've learned as staff looking into what we currently have in the industry. So we've heard a lot of comments throughout our public outreach, and especially from our cities, about Placer County's intention to, quote, increase the amount of marijuana in Placer County. The fact is that Placer County already has a thriving 100% unregulated commercial marijuana industry at this very moment. Any approach your board may recommend should serve to reduce, limit, and regulate currently unregulated activities and clean up many of the environmental, social, and criminal issues that currently plague Placer County's marijuana industry. The policy decision facing Placer County is less about whether to allow activity to come into the county, but rather the extent to which Placer County chooses to control and regulate what already exists here. An overview of the existing commercial medical marijuana industry and the marijuana industry and culture in general in the county is that we have, we estimate, and some of these numbers are hard to come by and we do our best to determine them, but we estimate somewhere in the ballpark of 4,000 total growers. Those are obviously many of them very small and nowhere near a commercial scale. Just a perusal of Google Earth, it's pretty, and these are out-of-date photographs, but you can easily identify well over 100 large-scale outdoor cultivation sites. We estimate, just what you can see readily on those maps shows over 30 net acres of outdoor cultivation. Based on conversations with the industry, we estimate that the indoor cultivation going on, which is much harder to detect, is probably at least again that much. So it's probably double that 30 net acres worth of production in Placer County. There's all the other activities going on surrounding that, such as manufacturing and distribution. So this slide shows a couple of websites that you can readily go to. The first is weedmaps.com, which is a site that caters in connecting patients with dispensaries or mobile delivery services. Although they are prohibited in, I think, every jurisdiction within Placer County, you can see that there's, I believe, over 30 delivery services operating currently in Placer County, many of them in the western and southernmost parts of the county. The second website there is called Grow Store Finder, and what that website specializes in is connecting people with what they call these hydroponic stores, which are stores that specialize in selling all the growing supplies to cannabis cultivators. And so, as your board's well aware, it takes a lot of customers to support a brick and mortar retail location, and a search of Auburn reveals, I believe, something like 39 different stores within a 25-mile radius catering to this industry. So it just gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the support industries and the scale of those support industries and the cultivation that's occurring in order to support that many stores. The next slide's a couple more websites. CaliforniaBudTrader.com, that's one where you can find a lot of Placer County activity on. And then our old favorite Craigslist. This is what comes up when you type in the terms wax and shatter in a search of Craigslist. You get all of these wonderful things. There's a couple of delivery services there. There's a number of different products, and then some extraction equipment as well that comes up with that type of search. So we have product, delivery services, and manufacturing equipment there. So these are a couple maps of just kind of what that distribution of outdoor cultivation sites looks like. A lot of this conversation started with the concerns over the town of Sheridan, or the unincorporated community, excuse me, of Sheridan. And there's about 30 easily identifiable outdoor cultivation sites right in the town center. Many of them are very close, if not immediately adjacent to the Sheridan Elementary School. And it really highlights that regulations are needed regarding large-scale outdoor cultivation in residential single-family zoning. If nothing else, I would hope that that's an outcome of this effort, is to clean up some of the impacts to the community of Sheridan. When you get out into some more rural areas, such as this snapshot of District 4 or District 5, excuse me, it's a more widely distributed type of situation, but again, fairly common. So each of those little yellow pins looks something like this on the ground. They vary in size a little bit, but that's what we're seeing the grows in Placer County often look like. I'll just give you an idea of that. And so really the lens through which we looked at this issue was based on these goals that your board adopted back in January. So first and foremost, promote public health and safety. All that goes along with that. Reduce the size of the illicit market for cultivation and retail sale. All of that cultivation that's occurring right now, there's really no control or no accountability as to where any of that production actually ends up.
And that goes both for the grows outside in the county as well as the grows indoors in the city, correct?
I believe that's true, yes. Certainly prevent non-medical access and use by youth. Reduce environmental harm to water, habitat, and wildlife. And there's a lot of issues associated with that bullet. Provide clear criteria for responsible businesses and patients who wish to operate within the law. And that's something we've heard from the patient and cultivation industry, is they want a clear set of rules. They want to know where those boundaries lie so that they know which side of those boundaries they are on. Develop a fair system of regulation and taxation that supports public purposes. And one of the concerns that we've identified, and we've heard experiences from others, is that you can tax and regulate this industry right back underground if stuff is too difficult to comply with. And then finally, and probably one of the most important things, provide flexibility and authority for modification or adoption of additional measures into the regulatory process to ensure effective implementation. This is a huge new process that the county is embarking on, and there will be missteps, and we feel it's important to acknowledge that this isn't a one and done kind of situation, but rather an ongoing conversation with your board to make adjustments as necessary. So what the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act did is it did away with that previous collective model where people would get the 99 plant recommendations from their doctor and then share their excess production either through a dispensary or a collective or whatever. Did away with all that. So the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, or MRSA, very clearly delineates personal use cultivation as 100 or less square feet per patient. And then it defined anything else above that as commercial cultivation. Furthermore, prohibits any direct sales from a commercially licensed cultivator to a patient. It requires that commercial cultivation, as was mentioned previously, have that track and trace seed to sale tracking system implemented, and that unique identifiers carry through from the commercial cultivator, through licensed transporters, licensed manufacturers, distributors. The distributors are required to test all of the product that they handle for everything from THC content to pesticide residues to molds and other adulterants, through to a licensed dispensary at which a patient with a doctor's recommendation can purchase the product. So it's either 100 square feet per patient or this entire regulated licensed, both at the state and local level, system through to the dispensary where the patient could purchase the product. So the track and trace system is something that several other states have implemented. California, through the California Department of Food and Agriculture, is currently looking at different options and ways of accomplishing that. You may have heard on the news that Microsoft announced last week that they are looking to get into the business of software development for track and trace. Humboldt County, clearly one of the pioneers in this field, is currently piloting a track and trace program with a company called SICPA, which is an international company based in Switzerland that specializes in secured identification, traceability of high-value products, and for instance, right now they are responsible for printing all the U.S. currency and also all of the little tax stamps on every pack of cigarettes sold in the state of California. So a very large international company working with Humboldt County currently to develop a secured track and trace system. So just to reiterate, and I apologize, the Type 11 or Type 12 license has somehow fallen off due to the formatting error here. But these are the full suite of licenses under the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act. And so these are here for your reference when we get into the alternatives if you want to bounce back to this slide. Type 1 through 3 are different types of cultivation licenses. Type 4 is nursery, so that would be the production of non-bearing plants to sell to others who would then raise them to maturity. 6 and 7 are different types of manufacturing. 8 is testing, which is a required step in a regulated commercial system. 10 and 10A are dispensaries. 11 is distribution, and 12 is the transportation license. So now we will get into the alternatives, and these are not meant to be set in stone by any means, but a conversation starter, and I would welcome any feedback on modifying these that your board would have for us. So alternative A is the first of the 5 alternatives and the most restrictive. It is very similar to the ordinances, although not identical to the ordinances adopted by Rockland and Roseville. And frankly, we don't have ordinance level detail here, but rather a broad concept. It allows 50 square feet of cultivation by a patient, indoors only, and no commercial activities allowed. One of the things you'll notice is that we have a fairly high cost for implementation here, and that revolves around something we'll speak to in a little bit, but we strongly feel that dedicated staff, if any enforcement approach that has real teeth requires dedicated staff. And so we've built some of that into this model. With the personal use, there's not really a very good opportunity for cost recovery, and so it has a very high net counting cost with this alternative.
Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, Josh, if I could.
Yes.
You go first.
So I was actually going to ask about that point. So this $969,000 startup and the $809,000 cost ongoing, where would that come from if there's no revenue associated with it?
I would assume the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
And then my question, in Sheridan, of course, as you mentioned, there are a lot of urban grows. The county passed an ordinance and intended to enforce it, which said we're not going to allow those anymore. We would have to enforce that under our land development standards. Typically, that would be a code violation enforcement. But my request earlier had been, and I hope your numbers reflect the fact that it would not be done by our traditional land development code enforcement folks, but by the deputy sheriff. So are all of the costs in there reflective of that?
Yeah, so code enforcement staff is less expensive than the deputy sheriffs, and so this is a code enforcement staff cost.
This is a code enforcement staff.
Yes.
Are you recommending that's viable, or do you have any comment on that?
We have run some models, and the deputy sheriff's a little more expensive. It's in the same ballpark. It's not a radical cost differential if you're asking about the cost specifically.
Thanks. Did you?
I had a question.
Oh, sorry, John.
Would we want to have deputy sheriffs do this type of work as opposed to a code enforcement person? I'd much rather have the deputy sheriff out there fighting crime than having them count plants. So
you know,
If
that's
having the plants is a crime, then they're accomplishing both tasks at the same time.
so we have had conversation that's a lot farther down the road than we are right now, but I think any approach needs to have a level of sheriff's involvement. That's just almost a given in a meaningful program. The extent to which it's sheriff versus code enforcement, I think, you know, looking at land use regulations, you know, I think that's a decision to be made down the road.
Fair enough.
Any other questions on alternative A? Thank you. So alternative B is a more liberal personal use only model, which would potentially include both outdoor and indoor cultivation up to 100 square feet per patient, which would be more reflective of some of the rural areas of Placer County. You know, this was based on some conversations we had about, you know, someone, you know, on a 10-acre parcel in Forest Hills in a much different situation than somebody on a quarter-acre lot down in Sheridan, for instance. And so the land use dynamics and the appropriateness of outdoor cultivation or stuff at a little larger scale up to what the state law allows might account for some of those dynamics in an ordinance that the county would propose. So again, identical costs to alternative A, just the difference would be that the personal use cultivation is up to the maximum allowed by the law instead of a more restrictive model.
Mr. Chair, I do have one question. Is there some particular reason we're proposing no caregiver production under this?
So the state law allows for a primary caregiver to grow up to 500 square feet for up to 5 patients. And, you know, we'd batter around as staff, you know, how do you accomplish that with no revenue source and enforce it, and just, you know, how do you not end up with 500 square feet of completely unpermitted production with no oversight? There's certainly an opportunity to explore that further, and I'm sure we could come up with a good solution to it. There's also an option to allow caregivers, but only allow 100 square feet, for instance, and so I welcome your feedback on that issue.
Yeah, I just, when I see the no caregiver, my concern is for, you know, those individuals who have, you know, legitimate medical needs, who are maybe incapable themselves of cultivating cannabis. And I think we should probably, if we go with either of these alternatives, create some sort of consideration that their caregiver can grow for them.
Yeah.
If I could, I'd like the audience to refrain from any reaction to what we're saying. We've got a long meeting ahead of us, and we want it to be efficient, and we've done this for a long time, so we'd appreciate it if you'd save your comments until you get to the microphone if you're going to choose to do that, and we'll get through this much more efficiently and effectively, actually.
Mr. Chair. Yeah. John, if we, or Josh, I'm sorry, if we took either alternative A or alternative B, which has 100 square feet of maximum, those growers out there now that are beyond that, they will be in violation of county code. Is that correct? And so who's going to go out and tell those growers that now they're in violation of county code?
That's why we have new staff proposed within that these scenarios.
Okay. Do you have any idea how many growers are beyond that?
Well, you know, the previous things I mentioned and those Google Earth maps and stuff like that, I would say all of that was mentioned is in excess of that 100 square feet.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So alternative C is a limited pilot program, we're calling it. So that would, we would ask that the board would give some direction on how to regulate personal use cultivation, whatever sort of limits your board directs. And then additionally, this would include up to, you know, for instance, and this is certainly up to discussion by your board, as many as 30 commercial scale cultivation permits. And what that does is it would provide a source of revenue for regulating this program. It would allow many of those, as Supervisor Holmes just mentioned, who are existing today in excess of that 100 square feet to come into regulatory compliance and continue their operations, while at the same time providing very strict guidelines to clean up a lot of the illicit activities that are going on. So other things we would recommend with this approach would be a stakeholder advisory group made up of a diverse group of stakeholders, and consider a sunset provision so that at a later date, this pilot program would come back to your board with a report and for further consideration, and your board could at that point halt it, modify it, extend it, however you choose. So this has a slightly higher number of staff, but then we anticipate we would collect fees to recover our costs on that program, and then that would also open up for consideration a tax initiative should your board want to consider that.
Chairman?
Yes.
Can you go back to C, please? Ongoing costs are pinned at $1,096,000. Fees at $1,021,000. We have county policy generally of making certain that things which carry costs for the county actually recover those costs for the fees. Why is there a difference in those two numbers?
Yeah. So we had had conversation with our sheriff's department and said, what would you need in this program? And they said, we do have existing staff for most of our role, but we would need approximately $75,000 in additional overtime expenses and then some additional helicopter flight time. And they further made it very clear that they were uncomfortable in receiving any financial support directly from the industry, and so they preferred that they would receive general fund to pay for their portion of enforcement. So there's a $75,000 difference between the costs and the collected fees reflected there.
So under this proposal, that $75,000 would come from general fund monies?
Correct.
Like from property tax and, okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair. Josh, I see, alternative C does not have dispensaries, is that correct?
Correct. The only commercial activities are cultivation and a limited number of nurseries, and so there's a finite number of both of those only. So, that's frankly one of the weaknesses of this program under this proposal would be that any commercial cannabis that's grown here, in order to be legally compliant, would have to be sold in a different jurisdiction that allowed dispensaries. So alternative D is an expanded pilot program. So this would include the same level of commercial cultivation potentially, plus the regulations on personal use cultivation, but would additionally include some finite number of permits for dispensaries, distribution and transportation, non-volatile manufacturing, which is not the butane honey oil, and several permits for testing. So that would have a full comprehensive MRSA compliant distribution model, but at a very finite, limited scale. And so again, a sunset provision, an advisory committee, and again, the costs are a little higher, a little more staff, but then the cost recovery is identical in the end to alternative C.
Supervisor Duran has one.
Yeah, we have, or not we, but Sac County has 33 dispensaries fully operational. If we were to knock out the 2 dispensaries in Placer County, so there wouldn't be any dispensaries in Placer County, and use delivery, is that an option?
Yeah, so the delivery license, and I believe the 10A license in particular, allows for mobile delivery services. So that's part of that dispensary license does allow for mobile delivery services under the state law.
And then hypothetically, and I know I've talked to Becky about this before, there is a possibility of a non-public dispensary to be utilized with a delivery service, correct?
That is our understanding, yes.
Thank you. It's not open to the public, it's just connected to a delivery service.
So no brick and mortar retail location?
Right.
Yes.
And Josh, before we move off that slide, can you costs, I understand what you're talking about there. Mm-hmm. Can you explain what the revenue offsets are how would fees be generated? How would sales tax be generated? How is a cannabis tax different from sales tax?
Right. So the fees are cost recovery fees that would be charged for permitted activities. So when you come get a permit for cultivation or manufacturing or whatever, we'd need to do obviously a cost study and match the county's expenses with those activities and recover our fees. We cannot make a profit. It's not legal for the county to make a profit on its fees, but it is legal for the county, and the board can approve fees to recover our costs for administering the regulatory program.
Would that still exclude the $75,000?
Yeah, so that number also reflects that $75,000 excluded.
Okay.
Sales taxes were estimated, so the numbers that they were based on, the $50,000 is based on 1%, which is, I believe, and I'm far from the sales tax expert for Placer County. I believe the county receives 1% of sales tax, and that would be 1% of the sales tax is only from the dispensaries, which is the only retail activity that would be taxed through conventional sales taxes. The cannabis taxes would be, should there be a ballot initiative to put a general tax on cannabis-related commercial activities, then those numbers are generated based on some assumptions that we have plugged in, and those are the numbers that were generated.
Well, on the 30 cultivation permits?
Yes.
What is the maximum square footage on those?
So what we looked at was that there are those type 1, 2, and 3 types of state licenses, and our county ordinance is consistent with that. Those are based on the size of the cultivation area. So that includes type 1 cultivation, which is up to 5,000 square feet per license, and then type 2 cultivation, which is up to 10,000 square feet per license. The state law says that type 3 cultivation licenses are to be limited by the state of California. They have not come out with their regulations yet to tell us what that limit's going to be, and so we don't feel comfortable even entertaining any thoughts of type 3 scale cultivation until the state tells us how many of those licenses we would even have available as a county.
Okay. And I also know that there's been some concern about open, grows. It's possible to put on like hoop covering or a greenhouse on those bigger.
Yeah.
bigger things.
So in your memo, it identifies that with both of these limited pilot programs, it would be mixed light, which is basically think of it as in a greenhouse or indoor cultivation. And neither of these pilot programs, at least staff would propose, and certainly open to your feedback, any true outdoor, just open air under the sun cultivation under either of these pilots.
I got the memo. I just want to make sure
Okay.
I understand
Thank
what
you.
the options are. So.
Okay. Any other questions on this alternative? Okay. And then alternative E is kind of, we've gone from cold to hot, and this is what you might call the hot alternative, which is basically create a regulatory framework and implement the full suite of licenses in Placer County and allow, to some extent, the market to determine what number that is. And so basically, our set of regulatory criteria, and if an entity or an individual can comply with those regulatory criteria, then they would have the ability to obtain a permit to conduct their activities in Placer County. So it's there's no finite number of licenses. I mean, your board could certainly pick and choose if you wanted to limit dispensaries but not cultivation, for instance. That would still obviously be your prerogative. There's no sunset provision in this proposal either. So the fees and taxes get a little bit more difficult just because that scale would be a moving target, and so it's a little bit hard to predict exactly what the market would drive as far as revenues as well as the costs necessary to administer that program. So we've done our best to kind of make some assumptions, but those numbers are a little tougher to come by. So any questions on that one?
I did have a question, just
sorry.
generally on relating to all of these, not any particular alternative. Since we're looking at this as sort of land use management, we can certainly implement things like no commercial cultivation in residential zoning of any description. We can put that into place.
Absolutely.
We can put a minimum parcel size on.
Absolutely.
As we did for the hen ordinance, we can do things like say it has to be closer to your house than your neighbor's house. You can only have X, I think it was 6 hens, but different, maybe it's 6 plants if you're, growing for private use. But beyond what you're proposing here, we have the full array of land use guidelines and restrictions to put on top of this.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That is correct, and in fact, there's a provision in the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act that requires that all existing environmental protections that are found in state law that are not related to cannabis but would affect it, such as water quality rules, timber conversion rules, grading rules, all of those things also must be in compliance. So it's both all of the state environmental protections plus then any zoning, parcel size, setbacks, odor mitigation, anything that a land use ordinance would also throw on top of that.
And I see that there's folks here from the cities, both from the police forces, but also from the city council. If we were to say, let's go ahead with one of these, whatever that is, and I'm not gonna presuppose my board takes any action, but we say it can't be in any residential zoning, or, proactively say it can only be in ag, not res ag, but ag, or it can only be in forestry, not res forestry, but forestry. Does that get to the concern about it being cultivated in cities, and that the concern that the cities has because their zoning sort of definitionally is residential? I mean, maybe that's a George question.
Yeah. So the difference between the county and the cities is the county has much different type land uses and size parcels and that sort of thing. So when the cities talk about they want it banned inside their city, I understand because they live in a high density residential area. And anywhere in Placer County that was zoned high residential, like some of the subdivisions in western Placer County, some of the larger
Sheridan.
subdivisions. Yeah, in Sheridan, which is residential single family, there's not gonna be any growing allowed there. That would be what I would think, because it's just not appropriate.
Hey, commercial.
Yeah, well, okay, sorry. Commercial, no commercial growing. But you might even want to look at some regulations with regard to personal, because like you said, even with the hen ordinance, we put a regulation on personal amounts of chickens because you don't want to live next door to someone with 65 chickens. Maybe you do. I don't, but maybe you do. So we have all of those things that we can look at. And I think the thing that is the most confusing to people is I don't think when we are done regulating it, that in the portions of the county that are like cities, our ordinances will be very, very similar if we put an ordinance into place. And then when you get out into our more rural areas and farm zones and that sort of thing, where traditionally heavier agricultural activities took place, that's where you'll start seeing production of marijuana.
But we could still restrict that production even in those more
Absolutely.
rural areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
Not
you.
an issue.
Just a comment, George, I appreciate you bringing that out because I know that that's a pretty big area in Robert's jurisdiction, especially the Sheridan area. I don't have a problem with, the city's regulation, where I live. I think it makes sense. I do have a big problem with the cities telling the county outside of the urban areas what to do with their land, so.
And if I could follow up on that, as the supervisor who probably represents the least urbanized areas of Placer County, I would ask my board, if we do go ahead with some of this, to be mindful about making sure that, many of those same concerns that people in urban areas have, people in rural areas have as well. They don't want to see it, they don't want to smell it. So how do we put some sideboards around that rural use that both protects the rights of the patients, but also frankly protects the rights of the private property owners who may not be patients and may not want to, see 65 hens, so.
Do you want me to respond to that, or is
If
that?
you would like.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and there are a lot of, tough things going on out there, and certainly in District 5 is not spared from those conflicts that exist right now. So just to wrap up this presentation on alternatives, these are things which staff believes should be considered by your board in any approach that you recommend. Starting with a more conservative model, you can always loosen it up over time. Restrict the marketing, advertising, and other related activities to the extent allowed by law. Expanding prevention and education measures aimed at curbing potential use by youth. We heard a lot of stuff when we were out in the community about, marijuana is easier to get in the high schools than alcohol is right now, and that's really concerning. Assuring that a regulatory and enforcement efforts are proactive and adequately staffed to ensure effectiveness. That's one of the things, with the, we had a little discussion about code enforcement versus other enforcement methods. Code enforcement right now is tasked with a complaint-driven type of enforcement model, and we believe that a more proactive going out and seeking violations and addressing them proactively is a better or a more necessary approach to this issue. Along with that, developing swift and substantial enforcement response to ensure timely and effective action. So that's the other part of our existing code enforcement process. Is it's a 6-month to a year process typically, which isn't really effective with this issue, and also having real teeth in it to where there is a real penalty and a real deterrent to violating the ordinance. Providing certainty in a regulatory approach. So if you allow certain activities, there needs to be a high degree of certainty that people who are in compliance feel like they don't have to look over their shoulder anymore, and they can come into the light and be protected by that ordinance. And then, like we said, convening an advisory council with stakeholder involvement to kind of keep this issue in mind and continually update the board as concerns arise. So we have a summary of alternatives. We're going to come back to this in just a second, but I'm going to turn it over to Becky just to wrap things up.
Okay, so this slide does summarize the 5 alternatives analyzed for your board today, and should your board direct any of the alternatives between C and E, you would then have the option to consider submitting a tax ordinance to the voters regarding commercial medical marijuana. So given the timing constraints we are facing, should your board opt to place an item on the November ballot, staff were requested to develop a tax ordinance proposal for your consideration today. MRSA does allow local entities to tax commercial cannabis activities to use for any public purpose your board determines a worthy investment. A general tax requires board approval at second hearing by 4/5 vote and a simple majority vote of the electorate. Many jurisdictions are choosing to invest revenue raised from cannabis regulation for health and social initiatives such as early childhood development, proven drug education approaches, and expanding substance abuse treatment capacity. For certain products perceived as having health or social impacts, taxation provides a way to influence consumer choice and to invest in options that reduce harm. Tax proceeds can be used to finance regulatory oversight of the marijuana industry and to support a number of public health initiatives. Colorado earmarks marijuana funds for public schools, capital construction, and enforcement of marijuana regulations. Washington earmarks funds for campaigns to discourage use of marijuana by minors, public education, public health, along with program impact evaluations. And I do apologize, we have developed PowerPoint slides for these, but for some reason they aren't appearing for us today. So the projected tax revenue identified in the 5 alternatives is based upon the framework that we have worked with HDL to develop. And a summary of those assumptions is as follows. Taxes are related to the level of activity and allows flexibility. The initiative staff developed in collaboration with HDL allows your board to adjust the tax rate based on market conditions. And the details are as follows. Cultivation tax would range from $10 to $20 per square foot of permitted cultivation area. Nursery production tax would be $6 per square foot of permitted production area. Manufacturing, testing, dispensaries, distribution, and transportation tax would range from 4 to 8% of gross sales. So again, this approach allows greatest flexibility and maintains the utmost discretion for the board to adjust the tax revenue and to determine for what purposes the revenue would be best applied. So that does conclude our staff presentation today, and would turn the discussion over to your board at this time.
Okay, so before we get started, we'll just go with board questions at this point and/or comments.
Becky, Josh, I'm not sure to ask who asked this, but on alternative A and alternative B, it says 50 square feet per patient or 100 square feet per patient. So if there is a residence that has 3 patients, does that mean each one can grow 100 square feet of marijuana?
Yeah, according to the law, that is true. Your board could place additional restrictions if they chose to.
So they don't have to be the homeowner, they can be a tenant or?
It's per patient, so that's really as far as they've defined it.
All right.
Kirk?
So this came to us last year, thank you, Mr. Wygant, in the spring as kind of a Sheridan-related item, and some of the grows that were going on there and continue to go on there. Had, at that time, after we left that board meeting, the sheriff's department gone out to any one of those grows and said, you can't do that, what would have been the consequence?
Well, I hesitate because even speaking with the sheriff's office, they explain the difficulties around trying to do just that type of thing. And frankly, Supervisor, I would prefer that question go to the sheriff's department. They have a variety of experiences that they experienced in trying to affect the implementation of the law the confusing law that existed previously.
Excuse me, but let me team tag on to that. Sometimes Kirk and I can do that. So one of my questions that I have, and it's mostly for county council, but it's my understanding that if county council was to recommend to the board something that they believe they could successfully defend, which is not a black and white circumstance, I think that's an operative thing to keep in mind, that it's the likely risk of success. But if the board wanted to be successful in defending itself in the event that we ended up in litigation, because I have seen over the 20 years, our public protection system actually be discouraged from prosecuting marijuana, specifically going way back to the passage of the medicinal marijuana initiative 20 years ago. So in Sheridan, as I understand it, if the county attempted to enforce in any way the fact that marijuana is illegal as a crime federally, that in California, we would almost certainly fail. Is that correct?
Yeah, that goes to the issue of whether or not we enforce federal laws, and the answer is no. But it also goes to the issue of whether or not we could enforce a complete ban. And there was a recent change in the MRSA law that dealt with whether or not local entities can enforce complete bans. The explicit language of the original MRSA that was passed in October explicitly provided local entities the authority to completely ban. Then in February, when the amendment took place that took out the March 1st, 2016 deadline, they changed this law. In addition to, they took out the words ban, took out the reference that local entities could explicitly ban personal consumption. This is personal cultivation, not commercial cultivation. And they substituted it with a new phrase under Section 7 of Article 9 of the California Constitution. And I had made copies of this particular section. It's 11-362-777G, and I provided them to the board. But what that means is there now a conflict between local entities attempting to institute a complete ban? And that, before this change in the law, there was no question. The Inland Empire case specifically found local entities did have a right to completely ban, under their police power and land use zoning, this issue, the cultivation of marijuana. And this goes all the way up to the most recent case of Kirby versus County of Fresno. Now that issue is really back in play because those prior cases dealt with the Compassionate Use Act and the medical marijuana program, but it did not deal with MRSA. And MRSA is such a comprehensive regulatory scheme, the issue now will likely garner litigation.
So it sounds like, and going back to my attempt, which failed, to get rid of grows in Sheridan, our best bet is to have our authority vested in Land Development Authority and enforce it not as a crime, but as a violation of our zoning text. Is that accurate?
Yeah, also Kirby versus County of Fresno said local entities cannot institute their own criminal penalties for violation of the MMP or CUA. So therefore, the criminal penalties such as a misdemeanor, we couldn't include that in a regulatory structure. So if you're just thinking of personal use, there's an issue as to whether or not you can completely ban personal use now because of the change in the law.
Right.
Commercial use, there's still specific explicit authority for the local entities to basically decide where they want it or if they want it at all. But that's under a different section, and that's commercial use dealing with the commercial cultivation of marijuana.
And I'm sorry, Kirk, I want to get that because I just
Okay,
trying to
thank you.
piggyback on that,
Yeah,
see if we
no,
could get to
I-
where we both wanted.
I appreciate that. So what's the answer to my question?
So I don't think he understood the question you were asking.
The question is simply, if upon us departing the Board of Supervisors meeting where we first heard this, one of Placer County's finest was driving down the road in Sheridan and saw a plant exceeding a fence height, knocked on the door, what's going to happen to the property owner?
I think at the time in May when that occurred, number one, we just had a permissive ordinance that basically didn't allow cultivation of marijuana in any zone. So therefore, if code enforcement had attempted to enforce that, the first level, they would have been.
I didn't ask about code enforcement, I asked about the
Okay,
deputy sheriff.
deputy sheriff, same thing. The first level they would have had to reach is that whether the patient had a card that allowed them to have that. And the second level, the zoning level, would have been whether it was a nuisance, and we would, since we didn't have a ban at the time, we didn't have anything declaring it as a nuisance, we would have had to gone through the sheriff's department would have had to gone through the nuisance abatement process to address that issue.
So you're telling me that law enforcement has zero tools whatsoever? A sheriff's deputy sees an active grow in somebody's backyard as they're walking down the sidewalk, and we have no criminal prosecutorial path for that individual?
The sheriff could make an arrest, but that's where the immunities under the patient right to have a certain amount would be
Right.
litigated.
Okay.
The sheriff could make an arrest, it would be brought to the district attorney's office. The district attorney would have to decide whether to file a case or not. And then the district attorney, if they filed a case, would have to prosecute that case. But that's where the complications came, and I understand the sheriff's department has on occasion undertaken enforcement activities in Sheridan area.
Okay. So, thank you. So had they left here, they could have cited, assuming that it exceeded the permissible under MRSA, the 6 plants or the 100 square feet or what have you, they could have cited, arrested, gone through the criminal prosecution process.
Well, MRSA wasn't in existence back in May, but right now, they could,
Yeah, there's a lot of technicalities. The CUA prevented prosecution, but not arrest. The MMP, which was effective as of January, said you can't arrest if you meet all of these qualifications. And then there was litigation regarding, well, does this apply? Is this preempting the CUA? Yes or no?
Okay,
People-
fair enough. Then let's fast forward to today. Let's say it happened today, and one of Placer County's finest today drove not too far away from here and saw a grow that was obviously in excess of an individual use limit, what legally happens to that individual today?
Today, it's the same arrest procedure as it is before.
Okay.
And If you read the headlines, you see arrests occurring regularly all the way up until today.
Okay.
So, yes, they do have authority to arrest, but the CUA and the MMP provide immunities, and the issue is whether or not we could create a regulatory structure that makes it more definitive. So,
And you've already said that none of our regulatory authority includes any kind of criminal prosecution associated with it.
correct.
Right, okay.
Which is why
That comes from the state.
So, I understand that. So then, to the point of what our default remedy is, since we've essentially established that under a regulated structure or a non-regulated structure, regardless of what our board does today, whatever impediments are on our sheriff and our district attorney are there today, will exist tomorrow, regardless of the outcome of this meeting.
My personal opinion is if there's a regulatory structure that specifically outlines what's in and what's out, it assists the law enforcement agencies and the district
But they're
attorney.
going to be charged with the same thing, the maximum sentence is the same, all of it's the same, today, tomorrow.
Right, the same criminal penalties,
Right.
but we also.
Okay, so thank you. That's all I wanted to establish. Baseline, criminal penalty stuff, not going to change. Now, let's get to our land use authority. Somebody today growing, and we say, no, you can't do that. What can we do to them?
It depends on the regulation that we put in place. We would have.
Today, let's say there's no adopted regulatory structure when we leave here.
Okay. So, assuming that you're just operating under the state has civil remedies, they would take the license, they would do various things like
Assuming the
that.
license. they
Yeah,
would take
right,
the
they,
license.
they could impose a penalty,
Okay,
but these are civil remedies versus criminal remedies.
okay. Then, the county scenario. Regulated, we say, you can't have it unless we say you can have it. And it's a grow that we haven't said they can have. What is our authority?
Same, we would be able to institute the same civil type of penalties,
Which is what?
which would be if you're in violation of this, then you will be penalized a certain amount every day.
And what does that mean to me? If I'm somebody that's growing illegally, and the full force and effect of the Placer County Code Enforcement Department comes down on me, what's that mean to me?
So what it means is if a person is cultivating a product to make money, to support their family, and they're told, oh, you no longer can cultivate it, we have a summary process in place. In 1 week, we'll have a hearing to determine whether or not your plants are going to be pulled.
So that's it.
That supposedly would be an enforcement avenue that they would recognize as something to play by the rules versus not play by the rules.
So if I'm growing illegally in Placer County, the maximum I have to fear in a regulatory structure that's going to require fairly significant costs with which to comply, if I'm lucky enough to be one of the permitted growers, the maximum I fear is my plants go away, I lose a crop.
I believe there would be civil penalty authority through fines as well, in addition to loss of plants.
We don't have that today, civil penalty authority today, we couldn't,
No, we do.
yeah.
Through the administrative hearing process.
So we're we're talking about putting a regulated structure in place. Failure to comply with which essentially has, in the real world, no impact. So, excuse me, you'll have your turn. So we have today a legal structure in place that dictates what can be done, but at least today, driving down the street, should the county say, we're not going to allow any outdoor grow, driving down the street, any of Placer County's finest see something they know, hey, that's not permitted. They don't have to question in their mind, is it, isn't it? Do I call Josh and find out if these guys have a permit? Do I have to count the number of plants? I'm out in public and I see it, I know under an indoor grow kind of environment only, At least I know there that's, we've got that restriction in place. So that's a key to law enforcement, or a cue to law enforcement, hey, there's something going on here. Shouldn't happen, right? But in a quote-unquote regulated environment, where we issue permits and we allow people to grow outdoors in a regulated environment, there's absolutely no way, unless you are issuing updates on a daily basis and educating our law enforcement folks as to where these things are, who's permitted, for how many plants and all the rest, there's no way that just in the course of normal law enforcement, our law enforcement people can do their job.
I would anticipate that people would have a permit on site as well as in my office.
But it would then, again, require the sheriff's deputy to stop,
Mr. Chairman,
ask for the permit, all that.
I'm next, please.
As far as the costs are concerned, you're showing net county costs on alternative A and B of nearly $1 million.
Correct.
Are you presuming a baseline of 0?
That is new activities that would be added to existing.
So that would not then
That does not
supplant
represent
anything that the law,
anything existing.
that doesn't supplant anything law enforcement does. That's simply saying if we as a board said, you can't do this outdoors, you cannot have any outdoor grows, you anticipate it's going to cost $1 million additional dollars for us to enforce that?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. That's all I have for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jack?
Yeah, let's get back to this whole issue about what we have, what tools we have. Just a very simple question. Has law enforcement's role with regards to medicinal marijuana been basically eviscerated? It's very limited, correct?
Yeah, as far as, once the MMP was instituted, that specifically provided that there could not be an arrest. Prior to that, they could arrest, but there couldn't be a prosecution under the CUA. So if law enforcement goes to the door and someone has their identification card and it meets all of the various requirements under the MMP, there's not supposed to be an arrest. And I think that that's an issue.
And the rules have been limited to where their role has been minimized. So really, the only protection that we do have is enforcement, aside from those 8 different areas that Congress has allotted through the Cole memos that are of importance: drug trafficking, cartels, money laundering, criminal activity, sales to kids, and I think there's one other one. So, barring that, our only protection to protect us is regulation and enforcement. That's it. Yes?
I concur. What the regulation is, that's up to you. But whether or not the county should regulate, it seems pretty clear that regulation is the way to go and to benefit and meet the best interests of the county.
Thank you.
But regulation, just for clarity, because there's been some discussion leading up to this hearing, regulation can include a ban on outdoor grows. Of course. Correct.
Absolutely.
Did you ask, can it?
Yes,
Yes, it can include a ban on outdoor grows.
thanks. Anybody else at this? I have some questions, unless somebody's got, want to make sure I do you want to go first?
Yeah, I did actually have one question about what Robert just brought up was regulation includes a ban on outdoor grows. Looking at the alternatives, if we were to ban outdoor grows, it would cost the county almost $1 million a year, and there would be no revenue to offset that, correct? If we were to move to alternative B, which is personal cultivation, either indoor or outdoor, it would still cost the county almost $1 million a year with no revenue. So in both those scenarios, my concern is that we're asking all the taxpayers in Placer County to subsidize a small group of people. Whereas alternate C through D at least recoup their costs. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I want to circle back, make sure I understand stuff, and I think maybe for the benefit of the audience too, but mostly my head. as I understand the revenue component of it, the only revenue that the county can charge is as a result of commercial activity. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And the only amount that we can,
You can try.
setting aside taxes, the only, that we have authority to impose would be if we allowed cultivation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would mention that I believe Sutter County is attempting to collect a regulatory fee on personal cultivation of somewhere in the neighborhood of $140 per grow site or patient. And I did call them, and they have not reported any fees paid in the several months that program's been up and running. So.
And so then on the tax side of it, there's potentially a sales tax and a marijuana sales tax. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's existing sales tax that's just in general for retail sales in the county, and then the board could consider a specific, or not, I don't want to say the word specific, but a unique cannabis activities tax.
And both of those taxes have to be voted on, correct?
Yeah.
Yes,
so-
that's correct.
Okay. I think I'm good for now. Any other questions? Jim?
Getting back to the cultivation of 100 square feet, the growers now that have the marijuana card that are beyond the 100 square feet, do we have a way of, do we know who those growers are? Is there a system in place where they're identified?
Not currently.
So if we do take that action, how are we going to notify the growers that, I mean, we can't send them a letter and say you're in violation of the new county code. How do we do that? How do we get that message out? I'm sure there'll be enough people in here to let them know. But officially, how do we do that?
So I've actually given a lot of thought to that because that's a very necessary part of any new regulatory scheme that the county would implement. And as mentioned earlier, there is quite a network of different stores that serve that industry. We have a county website and a pretty robust county email distribution system that we have already been utilizing to share information about upcoming meetings and things like that. Additionally, we do have a cultivators association, a county cultivators association that's formed. Plus, there's several statewide organizations that many of the growers participate in. And so, this is, sharing of information is not unique to this industry. Certainly with the conventional agricultural industries, there's, the same kind of need arises quite frequently. And we have, good systems in place to share that information and really make sure the word gets out.
Do you anticipate any type of legal action against the county for enforcing that, to putting this in place with what they've already been doing? Do they have some kind of prescriptive right or whatever to?
There's always the possibility of litigation in this day and age. What the county is doing is trying to implement something as it relates to the state legislation. So I can't say there won't be a lawsuit. I am aware that there was a lawsuit. Whatever decision the board makes, if it is to provide for some sort of regulation, that regulation has to be vetted, has to go through a CEQA process, there has to be an analysis. So.
Okay, thank you.
Did bring to mind a couple of questions that I have forgotten. Talked about restricting marketing to the extent that the law allows. So I was presuming that there's something in MRSA or something recently by state legislative act. What is that? What can we do as it relates to restricting marketing at the county?
So the thought is there's, a lot of different imagery that's associated with cannabis use, and we've heard concerns expressed over, things like billboards and neon signs and different things. So, I think as the law allows, I think we're thinking First Amendment kind of issues, constraining the advertising down so it's not, to whatever extent the board would want to limit things like billboards on I-80 and things like that.
Similarly to enforcing our sign ordinance.
Yes, correct.
Another question, did you guys, so I've flown over the Forest Hill Groves, I've flown over the Sheridan Rural Lincoln Groves. I represent that area. I've visited on-site, on the ground, Sheridan. I know of no enforcement activities in Sheridan recently, meaning like the last 3 years. And the groves are obvious, and to me, clearly incompatible. Did you fully vet the notion that if we were to adopt something that prohibited, say, for example, out-of-door grows in an urban setting, that code enforcement is the appropriate methodology by which enforcement ought to take root, or as compared to deputy sheriffs?
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, we talked about it in depth, and code enforcement can deal with these issues. However, in some instances, it's like any other situation. Our code enforcement officers aren't armed. So if it looks like it's going to be even slightly dicey, we generally ask for a sheriff, a deputy sheriff, to accompany the code enforcement officer to the site of where the alleged violation is. And knock on wood, haven't had any problems. And frankly, from an enforcement standpoint, when code enforcement goes out with a sheriff, we get much better results.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just to,
Kirk?
yeah, just to follow up, make sure I'm clear. So, today, leave here, board hasn't done anything. Today, leave here, go to Sheridan, Forest Hill, find a 1/4 acre grow. I'm gonna lose my plants. It's essentially the net effect of what's gonna happen to me if I've got a 1/4 acre grow and it gets discovered today.
No, we don't have that. We don't have an ordinance in effect that would allow us to seize your plants,
I'm
as far
sure,
as I know.
I'm sure if law enforcement knocked on the door and it were found that it was not a permitted with their little card, I'm gonna lose my plants.
You'd have to ask the sheriffs, I'm not sure.
Well, I actually did a site tour with the deputy sheriff, so I could walk you through exactly what does happen here.
The worst case scenario is I'm gonna lose my plants. Worst case.
Okay, yeah.
Is there a worse case than that for me today?
Violating other laws.
Yeah, so what we've observed in other jurisdictions that have taken a very proactive code
I'm
enforcement
talking
approach.
today. The board does nothing.
We don't have any different ordinance from a year ago today. The direction today is what we put in an ordinance, so we need to go write an ordinance.
So in other words, today, worst case is I lose my plants. Other than that, not much gonna happen to me.
Well, today, I'll give you a perfect example because, you know, I was in charge of code enforcement for about 4 years. Okay, so here's how it lays out. Code enforcement officers go out to incidental camping in the forest, okay? Really common in the summertime, almost always associated with a marijuana grow, okay? The cutoff, before we call the sheriff, is 200 plants. 200 plants or less, we'll deal with it. 200 plants or more, we'll call the sheriff. That's essentially
And when
the
you deal
cutoff.
with it, what do you do?
Usually the remedy is by the time we find out about it, it's been a nuisance with regard to odor and that sort of thing. And we ask them how much longer they're going to be here. They usually say about 30 days, and we say we'll check back in 40, and they're almost always gone. And so is everything else.
So in other words, in that instance, they didn't lose their plants.
Right.
So
No.
still, okay.
No.
So today,
Right.
worst case, under scenario C, or even better yet, D, where we have set up our closed distribution, we have our permitted activities, we have our permitted dispensaries, we have all these permitted things upon which we are relying for the revenue to come from the issuance of those permits, the identification of those points of sale, and the sales taxes associated with those points of sale. If I continue to grow unpermitted, what happens to me?
So the potential would be to declare any non-compliant medical or marijuana to be a public nuisance, and that takes away a burden to prove that a nuisance is being created. So it's a
Okay.
much quicker process. Part of that financial analysis is an on-site hearing officer that is available on a regular basis, like once every other week, to hear all the cases, and that increases the turnaround time from, in some cases, 6 months to a year for code enforcement, up to a several week type of turnaround on enforcement.
And I'm found guilty. I've been there,
And then,
you're expedited, and I've been found guilty.
depending on your board's direction, there's civil penalty authority for plant abatement and for fines. And so this is where, certain other jurisdictions are going as far as levying fines to the point where, people are losing properties through lien sales and stuff after not paying fines because of violations of this type of activity.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now we are going to open it up for public comment. Appreciate you telling us your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes. Obviously, there are a lot of people here. We're not going to stay forever, so we'd appreciate it if your comments are not redundant, and you can basically just echo positions of other people and make it efficient. It'll actually be more effective to your particular goals if you do that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Miller. I'm from Americans for Safe Access. I'm also from the American Alliance for Medical Cannabis, and I am the state director from that organization. I'm here representing the patients. I am from the area code 95703. I do not wish to disclose my address for fear of my own personal safety. Something that we have to deal with in this industry right now.
Maybe you could do something else. Are you a Placer County resident or?
Yes, sir, unincorporated area, sir.
Thanks.
I want to thank you for taking this time for a proactive approach to regulate medical marijuana. It is a sensible, responsible, and sane thing to do in this county. By regulating, we know that it's a safe and responsible thing to do, and it will move us forward into a direction where we continue our research in medical cannabis and the importance that it can have on every patient's life. I'm asking that you moving forward in alternative E, in addition to consider alternative B. Every patient should have the right to grow medical cannabis. It is of utmost importance. Some patients do need that cannabis to be grown because we're noticing quite a new number of patients are currently juicing raw cannabis. And in order to juice that raw cannabis, which has a non-psychoactive approach, which is known as THCA, where the acid is still attached to the molecule, it has a very beneficial approach to medical cannabis patients. So it's important those patients be allowed to grow that plant so they continue their medical protocol in treating various conditions, everything from multiple sclerosis, diabetes, neuropathy, cancer, HIV, lupus, just to mention a few of the 700 conditions that we're noticing. Anecdotal proof that medical cannabis does in fact work. I do want to commend the staff for all their hard work and diligence over the last year to reach out to the community to address these issues. This is the most comprehensive approach that I've seen anywhere in the state, and believe me, I do deal with the northern half of California, and this is the most beneficial approach that we've taken. I would like to move forward and address the cultivation is very important, so we must continue that. Also, I'd like to address AB 2516, which is Wood's bill on the Assembly. It's just passed the Assembly for and gone over to the Senate. It provides for the cottage industry, and as patients have been providing this medicine throughout the state for the last 20 years, it's an approach that we have to look at because without these specific strains and these CBD strains, we will be putting every medical patient at risk if we cannot get these strains, and they are controlled by those patients that have been collectively growing. We can no longer collectively grow according to MRSA, so we need to put a safe and responsible ordinance in place. I'm asking for you to move with a comprehensive program here, and that will help create the tax base to help facilitate patients the right to grow within this community. It is a responsible thing to do, and as you know, we all want Placer County to be a place where we can all live and enjoy to live, the best place to live, work, and play. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lynette Davies. I have an activist organization, Crusaders for Patients' Rights. I'm also the owner of a dispensary in the city of Sacramento, and I have been operating for 10 years now. I work a lot at the state level in creating the regulatory system. Some of it I'm not a fan of. However, I wanted today is to ask you to please stay with E. And one of the reasons I want you to stay with E is because you have, according to your own staff, approximately 4,000 farmers in Placer County. If you have that many farmers, you do not want to make them your enemies or for the entire state to be your criminals. We want to move this forward. We do not want to move backwards. One of the things that we had at the statewide level is we brought law enforcement to the table. So maybe law enforcement in the local areas didn't get their opportunity to be heard, but their superior officers were present. They helped regulate this. They helped reform all of the regulations you see that would be on E. We should be following that example. That's what the state is issuing for us. For many years, we couldn't get anything to move forward because cities and counties wanted direction. Guess what? Your direction is here. We are not going to be moving backwards. We do not want to criminalize people. We want to move forward. We want to be able to have tax and regulate system that brings a productive member of society. We do not want to have people hiding in the shadows anymore. We're working on making this even better. We have time to move forward. Please consider doing E and also protect patients' right to individually cultivate. Very important. Thank you.
Good evening, County Board of Supervisors, and especially the county attorney who made some excellent points today. I think if we had more counties that understood what our rights were and the MMRSA, there would be fewer bans and more opportunity for counties like yours to take advantage of this and build more tax revenue.
Excuse me, could you state your name for the record, please?
Yes, I'm Shelby Lucero. I am from Sacramento County. I'm also activist. I'm a former head of town council for a small town called Cortland, California. I am a mother previously with a child that has had cancer. I understand your responsibilities as to the public as I do for the actual patients as well. I too have been arrested for cannabis, and because of my arrest, I developed a track and trace program, the only one developed for the state of California by someone from the California cannabis industry, and addressing the issues of Mr. Uller. You can tell who has a farm. You can tell who's within their guidance. If you had somebody that was in alternative A, their cultivation was up to 100 or 10,000 square feet, you could tell that they were in compliance. You could also tell if they've paid their revenues, all their dues through the city and county. It's really easy. To be able to regulate cannabis is the only way to go. My advice to you is to go with either alternative D or E and keep your money here within Placer County.
Good afternoon. My name is Henry Calderon. I'm the Executive Assistant for Government Affairs at a therapeutic alternative in Sacramento. Our director, Kimberly Cargile, cannot be here today because she is speaking at the National Cannabis Industry Association's business conference in the city of Oakland. Our director laments that she's not able to attend the meeting today, but it is my honor to read her statement this afternoon on her behalf. Dear Placer County Board of Supervisors, my name is Kimberly Cargile. I am the director of a therapeutic alternative, a full-service holistic health center and medical marijuana dispensary. We provide a wide variety of lab-tested products, offer guidance from educated and compassionate staff, and offer a variety of alternative healing therapies. We proudly serve up to 15,000 patients from our location in the heart of East Sacramento, near schools, parks, churches, and hospitals. We have been approved by the Planning Commission's conditional use process, permit process, and moreover, our private and residential neighbors welcome us as members of its community. I come here today together with residents and local patients to ask for your aye vote in enacting reasonable land use ordinances in Placer County. In addition to providing patients with quality and empathetic care, a therapeutic alternative continues to work closely with local and state governments to enact reasonable regulations for California's medical cannabis industry. We are elated that California's medical cannabis patients now have consumer protections afforded to them with the passage of the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, or MRSA. Since the passage of Prop 215 in 1996, Californians remain empowered to seek medical cannabis to treat a wide range of illnesses and ailments. Through medical cannabis, patients benefit from treatment with greater efficacy, less adverse side effects, while over-the-counter medicines and prescription pharmaceuticals remain available to Californians. The efficacy, adverse side effects, and high costs of these medications represent hard realities for many patients. Current laws in California have allowed many to seek relief and treatment with medical cannabis. However, that does not mean that access to medical cannabis has been consistent, safe, or easy. For instance, a therapeutic alternative currently serves thousands of patients from Placer County, individuals enduring medical conditions and symptoms which would otherwise completely debilitate them. As these patients continue to treat the variety of illnesses and disorders to great effect with medical cannabis, they must too undertake the drive from their homes in Placer County to our location in East Sacramento every few days. The risks and costs of driving far remain high, and we feel that it is inhumane to force our sick to drive as far as they do just to reach a safe and legal dispensary for the natural, non-toxic medicine of choice. MRSA, which seeks to regulate many aspects of the medical cannabis industry, includes health and safety as well as environmental concerns. And some may feel that a complete ban is sufficient to address the many legitimate concerns caused by illegal and unregulated grows in your county, but a complete ban would place Placer patients at risk of facing a largely unsympathetic judicial and penal system while doing little or nothing
Could
to
you
mitigate
wrap up your
pollution.
comments, please?
Yes. So with the passage of MRSA, we do ask for an aye vote for reasonable medical cannabis regulations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick point to that gentleman's comments. There's not an alternative up there that does not allow for personal use. So if your comments are simply that the county should not ban all use, even I, as the only one who's previously voted to ban all outdoor cultivation, even I have not said banning all use or personal grows. So if, in terms of the comments about taking away the medicine, that's not what this board is seeking to do.
My name is Roger Morgan. I live in Lincoln, founder of Take Back America campaign and drug activist for the last 20 years. For 15 years before that, I dealt with addiction of two stepchildren, aged 12 and 14, who got addicted to marijuana, then meth. I watched the total destruction of these young people. I think it's unfortunate that the issue of public safety has fallen all the way to the local level. The federal government for 7 years has done nothing. The state has done nothing. They admit that we have 50,000 cultivation sites and supply 60% of the U.S. market for recreational use. All of the conditions in the Cole memo have been violated. But I would tell you this, there's 3 areas that I think are critical for you, aside from whether you can ban everything or have a restriction on the number of plants one can grow. I think your first responsibility is public safety. The reality of today's high-potency marijuana is it's a very harmful drug. It's not an ag product. We don't have agriculture products that are toxic, that inflict harm on people. This causes brain damage, loss of IQ, psychotic breaks, leading to suicide, mental illness, birth defects, physical harms, and traffic deaths. All of those things should concern you, whether it's a violation of CSA laws. I've heard something new today because I think that based on my understanding, even conspiring to violate CSA laws is a federal offense. Whether they take action or not may depend on a new administration. But in the interest of public safety, environmental protection, maintaining quality in our communities, I believe that you have to restrict it as much as you can, if not ban it altogether. And everything may change in November anyway if we get an administration that may do the job. Thank you.
My name is Danny, and I am the assistant to the director at a therapeutic alternative in Sacramento County. We're a nonprofit mutual benefit corporation licensed by the city of Sacramento, and our business centers on medical cannabis benefits and the treatment of illness through holistic healing. We currently, as Henry said, see over 1,000 patients from Placer County. Some of them drive for more than an hour one way to seek treatment either daily or weekly. And we have a mother from Roseville who drives to seek treatment for non-psychoactive medicines for her child. She goes on her day off so she doesn't have to spend time in traffic. It would be nice for the medical cannabis patients of Placer County to have access closer to home. Medical cannabis has been legal for 20 years, and we've seen patients with numerous illnesses find relief from the medicine. With leaving it with the black market, there is not CBD-rich medicines with non-psychoactive THC in them for them to find it, or it is difficult for them to cultivate the plants on their own. So the medical cannabis patients of Placer County deserve safe access to their medicine here in their county. There are pharmacies readily available for people who choose to use pharmaceutical drugs, and they do not have to drive over an hour to reach them. Asking patients with medical issues to drive over an hour to find a reputable cannabis collective or dispensary is unreasonable and unfair. By keeping dispensaries out of Placer County, you'd be asking sick people to learn how to cultivate on their own or make weekly or daily trips to seek their treatment. Personal cultivation is a great solution for those who have time, health, money, skill, and resources. But the blind expectation of an ill person to have the strength and resources to cultivate their own medicine is a bit inconsiderate. Would you propose a cancer patient produce their own chemotherapy or a diabetic produce their own insulin? The demand for medical cannabis does not dissolve if you deny Placer County safe access. Denying the people of Placer County access to a regulated medical market further allows the black market to thrive, inviting lawless, unregulated dealers who aren't sourcing their product responsibly or lab testing. We are not criminals, neither are our patients. We're taxpayers, we're homeowners, we're college graduates, and we're good people who have chosen to direct our careers to help sick patients seek alternative natural healing. Thank you for your time today.
Can you give us your last name, please?
Gravel.
Can you say that again for us?
Danielle Gravel.
Member of the boards, my name is Jerry Mitchell. I'm a citizen of Rockland, and I'm concerned about this whole marijuana situation. And I want to first say that I've attended 4 different presentations put on by county staff regarding this topic, and with each one it's become clearer and clearer what is approaching. But most effective was Becky Reagan's staff report here, which lays out all the background and the changing laws and the evolution and the opinions of federal courts and so on and so forth that have arrived at this point where this medical marijuana situation seems to have its own top-down, up to the top momentum. And so it's kind of awkward to oppose it, given what everyone has said and the apparent weakness of our laws to allow the local entities such as a county to be able to address in a meaningful way the illegal grows. That being said, though, we have to keep in mind that I believe marijuana remains a gateway drug, and as a gentleman before me indicated, there's a lot of negative consequences. And so I come to these basic questions, which the answers to which I hope to be able to get from you at some point today. For alternative A and B, why would the cost be so high if it's inside only, particularly for alternative A? And as it is now, there's not a lot of enforcement occurs for inside grows, and yet we propose 4 full-time employees for $969,000. It just seems to be an incorrect number. Secondly, if the taxes that will be required to support alternative C, D, and E are not approved by the voters, what happens then? What happens if in November a recreational marijuana proposition is passed by voters? Does all this work go to the side and it's just freelance? Whatever happens, happens? And what is the budget for Placer County? My understanding is the neighborhood of $350 million annually? 800. 800. Well, then that's even more of a point. If we were to choose to have alternative A or B, even if it costs the taxpayers $969, that's a very, very small amount of money to pay for the protection we gain from that. Thank you for your time.
Hello, Board. My name is Susan Oles, Susan Best Oles. I am a citizen of Sheridan, the armpit of Placer County. My family's been in that town since 1972. I came back to buy my home from my parents, to raise a family and live there. It is now turned into literally a hellhole. Excuse my language. Everywhere around me is nothing but marijuana grows. My well is only 75 feet. I'm pretty darn lucky because I'm on the biggest aquifer in the county. I have to worry every day that it's going to get contaminated because there's 2 brand new greenhouses, industrial size, that just went in several weeks ago right across from my home. At the bottom of my property, there is an industrial sized greenhouse right next to my land, which I now promptly decided to give them free fertilizer by putting all my horse manure right across from them so they can have all the lovely flies since I have to smell their pot. It's getting bad. It's getting to a point my mother's on her asthma meds constantly. I recently had to move them in with me. And she can't breathe. She came down from Oregon, now lives here and can't breathe. It smells like a skunk all day long, all night long. You drive through our town and people go, "What is that horrendous smell?" That's our town. That's what it's come to. I do not mind dispensaries. I have to drive to the hospital to get my medications. I have to drive my parents to the hospital in Roseville to get their medications. Why can't the other citizens of Sheridan drive their family members to Roseville, to Lincoln, to Sacramento, to a dispensary, and get marijuana? It is no different than getting medication. I have no problem with them using it as medication, but when I have people coming to my property asking me, they will pay me $10,000 to $60,000 to put a greenhouse on my lower half because they want to grow their marijuana. That's not medical marijuana. When I have to landlock my neighbor and put it in a fence because her son and several other people wanted to grow marijuana, so I put a fence up, or I'm putting a fence up to stop it, and they threaten me that the Vagos in town motorcycle gang is going to come after me. I have Vagos, I have Hell's Angels in my town. Gee, I wonder what's supporting them. And yes, I was a deputy sheriff for 27 years. I totally understand, Mr. Bonner. Your hands are tied, because mine were too. This isn't fair for the law-abiding citizens. And I do respect the people that need it, but I don't respect the use of the other people in the area, or the abuse of the other people in the area, or the threats on my life. Thank you.
My name is Annie Aubrey. I'm from a dispensary in Sacramento County. I'm here to talk on behalf of option D or E and adding dispensaries to Placer County. I'm in charge of the services departments that we offer to our patients. People are coming in and they're trying to get off pharmaceuticals. And I run a Heal Yourself Naturally program where in assistance to their cannabis or their pharmaceutical regime, they will come see me. They have a hard time doing their own research, being their own advocate. So we have a team that is dedicated to giving them other opportunities to heal. We have Reiki, massage, reflexology, nutritionists, personal training, all kinds of services that we offer them, all for free, because we realize everyone that walks into the doors through the dispensary needs some form of healing. Recreational users all need some form of healing. You don't wake up and grab your Tylenol and say, "Where is it? I can't wait to take it." Everybody needs help. There's nobody that I've met as a healer that hasn't gone through life with some form of pain. We heal, we help, and we are there as advocates for our patients in any way that we can be, and that is adding these dispensaries is natural medicine for the people who don't want to take pharmaceuticals, who want to be proactive in their own journey to healing. Thank you.
Chairman Wygant, Board members, my name is Stan Nader. I'm a resident of the city of Lincoln and also a city council member. You've heard from your staff today, one of the chief proponents of this work is to regulate this activity. The city of Lincoln and many of the cities within Placer County have banned the cultivation and distribution of marijuana because we've made attempts to regulate and no one will comply. I think it's a fantasy to think that you can put something in place and that people are going to abide by it. I have a friend that lives in Colorado where we know it's free game with marijuana. He tells me that teachers are frustrated because the kids come to school stoned and they can't teach them. Automobile accidents that previously were a result of alcohol use are now succumb to majority of them are marijuana related. The cartels have moved in because it's a great thing for them to have all this activity going on. Bank robberies are at all-time high because you cannot put drug money in a bank. In fact, I'd be sure like to know what you're going to do with the tax money from this. Where are you going to put it? Because you're not going to put it in any bank because you cannot put any money related to marijuana activity in a bank. So I beseech you to take no further action on this for the benefit of the citizens of this county. I cannot understand why the rights of the few trump the rights of the many. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Sleeper. I'm a resident in Rockland, California. Myself, I'm a sixth-generation Californian. My great-great-grandfather came to California to farm in 1845, and we've been honorable, loyal citizens to this state. For my son is now the seventh generation. You know, you look around in the state, my wife and I were trying to choose a place to live and raise a family, and unfortunately, so many counties and areas in this state you just see going downhill, very unattractive. I actually grew up in the Bay Area, and glad I'm not raising a family in the city that I grew up in the Bay Area. Chose Placer County, very, very attractive community, very safe, wonderful education, wonderful public safety. Seems to be the model county in the state of California, in my opinion. Personally, out of all these alternatives, I'm not for any of them. I mean, I'm not a user of marijuana, but actually I have absolutely no problem with people using marijuana. I enjoy my glass of red wine in the evening. If somebody enjoys their marijuana in the evening, go to it. Totally fine with that. So if you had to choose one of these, I would say alternative A. So if you look around in the other counties, and people have already talked about this, but if you look around in other counties that have tried to make this work, you know, I think we see the negative consequences associated. It's right there in front of our faces. The evidence is there. We're talking about $1 million here to regulate, $1 million there. The negative impact to society and our county will be much, much more than $1 million, guys. We can look at all the charts and statistics. We could go through all these presentations, but let's just simplify things. I think our world has become so complicated, but you see so many things that come down to this decision. Is it good money? Is it legitimate money? Or is it bad money? Is it illegitimate money? I personally think after looking at all the stuff that everybody's prepared here, the illegitimate bad money is going to far outweigh the good legitimate money. And you talk about litigation, and again, I've heard $1 million here, $969,000 here. Say if your child or your neighbor's child lives next to an outdoor grow or a commercial grow, somehow they're lured onto this grow, and for whatever reason, for any marijuana-related activity, they die or they're killed. I think you guys might face a pretty hefty litigation there for making a decision. So I would just like to say that, I'm a proud citizen of Placer County, but I also try to be logical and think with common sense. Again, I have nothing against personal use of marijuana for medical or recreational reasons.
If you could wrap up.
But I just don't think we need this in our county. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm here for my trifecta. Sam Toll again from Loomis, California. I've talked to you and addressed you all about the idea about the black market and how there's two types of groups who benefit from that, the cops and the robbers. As speaking to you as a representative of the Libertarian Party of Placer County, I would offer alternative F, which would be a complete ban on the drug war. I think we learned from the Valentine's Day Massacre and the folks, Al Capone shooting down Bugs Siegel's henchmen in Chicago, fighting over turf that controlled alcohol distribution. Here in Placer County, we have a number of wineries, boutique wineries that produce wine. Not one of them, to my knowledge, has been held up at gunpoint and had the casks of wine removed. And that's because the black market on alcohol no longer exists. But I would like to talk to you today about something that I have personal contact with. I've put 2 kids through Del Oro. My third daughter, is a junior, going to be a senior next year. I've had the privilege of representing the Libertarian Party in Jim McCullough, who has just recently retired's Rock the Vote program, where I've talked to seniors, literally thousands of them here in South Placer County in every high school that pushes kids out into the public. And I can tell you from speaking to both my daughter, her friends, and those thousands of kids that it is physically impossible for more marijuana to be accessible to those kids. In fact, earlier today, it was suggested that by putting in more lanes on the 65 corridor in areas, it would actually increase traffic problems and not mitigate them. I would argue that if you put dispensaries outside every single high school, you would actually reduce the amount of marijuana that's available to those kids because IDs will be checked, licenses will be inspected, and it will actually have a counterintuitive effect. So I would suggest, short of alternative F being a complete free-for-all, that you take all of the information that you get today from everyone, including the hard work of Becky and Josh over there, and formulate something that really makes sense for everyone. There's people here who want to abide by the law. There's people here who are concerned about public safety. There's 4,000 grows going on today. This is still the greatest place in California to live. So I don't really think that we're in fear of losing what makes this place a wonderful place. And I would suggest that if we take the enforcement efforts that our law enforcement use towards marijuana and we focus them on folks driving under the influence of a cell phone, then the public safety would be much better served. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate your attention.
Hi there. Good afternoon. My name is Spencer Satterley. I've lived in the county my whole entire life, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Placer County Cultivators Association. This is a newly formed organization that seeks to represent the interest of a group of approximately 4,000 medical marijuana cultivators. We have more than 100 members that actively participated in our recent meetings, and we're part of a statewide community of cannabis cultivators that are actively supporting local regulations to permit cultivation consent within the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act as an effective way to solve the problems that we're facing as a community. We applaud the Board of Supervisors and the county as a whole for their outreach and education efforts over the last several months, and then for treating the issue of medical marijuana with respect and allowing for robust public participation. We are responsible landowners and tenants in the Placer County community. We believe that it is in our best interest of the county and its residents that all properties in the county meet certain standards regarding the fire safety and environmental concerns. Therefore, we support an ordinance that puts into place several strict environmental regulations and setbacks and encourage responsible cultivation while filtering out irresponsible cultivation. We are here to support your ongoing efforts to permit commercial and medical cannabis cultivation in a reasonable and effective manner. It is clear that the residents and businesses in the county favor an ordinance to regulate medical cannabis consistent with state law. We respectfully urge you to move forward today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a quick question, if I may, in follow-up for this gentleman, sir. If I may, just quickly. Placer County Cultivators?
Association.
Okay. And you identified how many cultivators, did you say, in Placer County?
4,000 in the area.
Okay. So just out of curiosity, let's say we move forward with one of these. Let's say Alternative D. Alternative D would limit cultivation to 30 permits. What happens to the other 3,970 of you?
I think it's similar to what you stated.
I'm sorry?
It's what you stated before. We can't control it unless we're part of it, right?
Okay.
So you
So
can't.
if
even if you pass something, it won't matter. If we're all in on it, helping you, we want to support you. We don't want to be against you.
I'm asking the question. If we issue in a regulated environment, if we allow permits for, as Alternative D advises, up to 30 cultivation permits, 2 permits for dispensaries, you've identified 4,000 cultivators in Placer County.
4,000 people that use medical marijuana to their benefit.
Okay. I thought you said cultivators.
Well, they're cultivating, but they're not against the law of cultivating. I don't understand the difference in cultivating and following the
So
rules.
how
We're
many-
advocating to follow the rules.
How many of those 4,000 do you think would fall?
I have no way of knowing that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm truly trying to figure out the scope.
Hi, good afternoon, Board. My name is Mason Gingras. I am a 30-year-old male that has been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I am that definition of what you hear with a young-bodied, abled male. I don't look like I'm sick, but I am sick. I have lesions all over my brain, all over my spine. I make jokes that I have a 9mm lesion on my spine, that I got shot. Because you can't think about what 9mm means. But when you think a bullet, now you know how big that lesion is. I have bigger ones than that. I'm here today because I've already run the gauntlet of prescription drugs to help with my daily problems and pains. I have spasms, pins and needles in my extremity, and the spasticity in my walking and movements. I'm still on 3 daily prescription meds to help with these problems. However, medical cannabis has significantly increased my quality of life by helping relieve the pain and muscle spasms. I now only have to take 9 pills a day for the symptoms instead of the 20+ meds I was taking before. The side effects of these medications were sometimes as uncomfortable as the symptoms they were supposed to be treating. And medical cannabis helps my symptoms with all these problems without those side effects. These new things that we're talking about would severely affect me and my quality of life and people like me. When we talk about the personal cultivation, I'm one of those people. I'm not going to be able to personally cultivate 6 plants. I'm going to need someone else. I'm going to need a dispensary. I'm going to need a delivery service. I'm that person. So please, it is my wish that you guys vote medical cannabis to regulate it in Placer County like cigarettes, like alcohol, like guns. If we don't, this will negatively impact the quality of life of myself and many other patients with chronic medical conditions that are no longer able to access medical cannabis. Thank you for your consideration.
Hello? Get as close as I can get. Good afternoon.
We have a mic for you.
Okay.
See if we can get it to turn on first. Do another one.
Yeah, give me.
Yeah, go ahead, Don. Good afternoon. My name is Rachel. I am 28 years old. I'm a resident of Rockland. And when I was 12, I dove into a pool and broke my neck, paralyzing me from the neck down. My diagnosis is quadriplegic. There are many trying things that come with being paralyzed from the neck down. I suffer from involuntary muscle spasms, depression, severe insomnia, headaches, lack of appetite, pressure sores, and severe body aches. Since the beginning of my paralyzed life, I have been on and off medications for these issues. 120 milligrams of baclofen, which is a muscle relaxant, 50 milligrams of Valium, which is also for my muscle spasms, 100 milligrams of Zoloft, and 50 milligrams of trazodone for my depression. I have tried multiple prescriptions for my insomnia that have all failed to work. I'm a pretty healthy person, as you can see. But after 15 years, my organs have been through a lot of man-made, chemically fueled drugs. I know that someday my liver is going to start shutting down. Knowing this, I would like to cut out many of the medications I'm on that marijuana can successfully replace. Most of my days are spent practicing my art. I have been teaching myself how to draw portraits with my mouth, which takes up most of my day if I'm not reading or going out. After my day, around 6 p.m., I use my vaporizer so that my body can relax and I can enjoy the relief that it brings. Then right before bed, I use it again to help me sleep. I very rarely use it during the day hours unless something is preventing me from going about my business. I treat it as a medication. I have spent more time in hospitals than anyone should have to. Not once have I heard a nurse, doctor, social worker, or even a respiratory therapist tell me that marijuana use is bad for me or that I should discontinue using it. At one point, I weighed only 107 pounds. I am 6'4", and 120 pounds is the very least that I should weigh. Due to using medical marijuana, I have a healthy appetite, and I now weigh 158 pounds, which is very healthy for me. During a recent hospital stay, my muscle spasms were so bad I couldn't breathe normally due to my chest and abdominal muscles contracting. I could barely speak more than a few words at a time. I called my dad, who brought in a tincture. I put a dropper of it underneath my tongue, and within less than 5 minutes, my muscles stopped spasming, and I was able to breathe as normal and get comfortable. In my discharge papers under medications, cannabis was listed. If you truly believe that there are absolutely no medicinal benefits to marijuana, then you absolutely need to spend time with someone in my condition or someone who struggles with a condition that can only be relieved by using medical marijuana. Thank you. And I would hope that if you vote today, that you would choose alternative E. Thank you.
Chairman Wygant, members of the board, my name is Donald Norris. I've been a resident of Placer County since 1972. I have a Master of Arts degree in psychology with a concentration in statistical research. I also have a Master of Science degree in counseling with a concentration in vocational rehabilitation and drug dependency. I'm a disabled Vietnam vet and one of millions that have been helped by cannabis. Not that many years ago, I was taking morphine, Oxycontin, oxycodone, and Dilaudid, rotating my opiate prescriptions every few months. The Veterans Administration sent me 30 bottles of Maalox every month to help offset the damage that was causing my stomach. Excuse me. In 1985, I turned to cannabis to help me recover, and eventually I replaced all my narcotic prescriptions with cannabis. For obvious reasons, the fact that folks like me can do this is a major concern to the pharmaceutical industries because it impacts their bottom line. Please recall, according to a 2014 study of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 47,055 people died from prescription drug overdose in 2014. To this day, not a single overdose death has been attributed to cannabis. Not long ago, I heard a board member state that we all know, quote, marijuana is not a medicine. Cannabis and medical benefits are incontrovertible, now proven by decades of peer-reviewed controlled studies published in highly respected medical journals. They're there for the reading on the internet. Cannabis has been shown to alleviate symptoms from a wide range of debilitating medical conditions like you've heard today with some of the folks that have talked here, including Alzheimer's disease, PTSD, epilepsy, HIV, AIDS, and cancer. I've attended several MAC board and city council meetings this year, and I'm concerned that most of the opposition to regulating and licensing cannabis providers in Placer County are speaking only half-truths. For example, a local police chief recently cited a traffic study conducted by the Washington State Traffic Safety Commission. In his presentation, the officer stated that Washington State had experienced a significant spike in fatal crashes in 2014 simply because of cannabis use. He failed to mention that more than half of those cited in this very same study also had a blood alcohol level of 0.08 and higher. I read the same reports, and as a statistician, I can tell you there was absolutely no correlation supporting the conclusion that the cannabis impairment caused these accidents, as some would have us believe. In fact, statements supporting this fact are embedded in the research itself. Supporters of prohibition tend to paint everything with the same wide brush. We all know there are folks out there stealing water and electricity, polluting state and federal lands, and leaving significant environmental damage in their wake. Their very survival is dependent on prohibition remaining intact. Please look around in this room today, because those folks are not here. The people that are here today are here to follow the laws and looking for your guidance. This proposal before you is an opportunity for Placer County to effectively regulate cannabis and change all of that. By creating and enforcing new zoning regulations, you can create a tax revenues that will allow Placer County to effectively mitigate problems such as those occurring in Sheridan and other isolated parts of the county. I would ask that the board discontinue prohibition, implement Alternative E, regulate and tax cannabis fairly, and provide folks like me with a safe pathway to compliance. Thanks for your time.
Members of the board, my name is Gordon Ainsley. I'm a citizen of Meta Vista, a chiropractor, and I guess as you all know, I'm a runner. And what I want to say is that I don't use marijuana, and I don't derive any economic benefit from marijuana. I haven't used it since my mid-20s. I did use it before then, unlike that liar Bill Clinton. I did inhale it, and I did enjoy it. I never bought it. I never thought it was worth buying. I've never thought any drugs were worth buying. So what I want to say, I sent a handout to you that I think is fairly well, and I speak from knowledge because I've done some publishing in Medical Science Journal and done a lot of reading. Obviously, you couldn't understand the stuff I read because it's in Medical Science East. But I have these four studies on the top sheet, and I'm going to read my summary of what's in those studies. First one, cannabis extract inhibits progression of brain, breast, lung, prostate, and colon cancer in animals and cell cultures. B, second study. Several cannabinoids exert anti-growth and pro-death effects on various cancer types: lung, glioma, brain, and spinal cord, thyroid, lymphoma, skin, pancreas, uterus, breast, prostate, and colorectal cancers, carcinoma, in cancer cell cultures and laboratory animals. C, cannabis constituents inhibit or even regress cancer cell cultures and animal cancers of breast, prostate, lung, skin, pancreas, bone, brain, lymph system, mouth, and thyroid, in addition to inhibiting metastasis. This is something that wasn't covered in the handouts. The other thing I'd like to mention is something that wasn't covered in handouts was the issue of depression. The handout says that some people get depressed. Well, they get depressed because cannabis is a very effective antidepressant. One of my friends tried to quit back in the days when you could risk losing your house over this. He spent a whole summer going to a counselor, taking drugs, still breaking into tears. His wife finally said, "I can't live like this, go back to taking the cannabis." That was in September, from May to September. And his comment was that the drugs control depression imperfectly in 5 months, or 5 weeks, and marijuana stops depression in its tracks in 5 minutes.
So we have a lot of things that I'd like to say, like, for instance, as long as we've been putting in marijuana restrictions, we've seen use of other drugs, namely methamphetamine, go up. And so to the degree that you make it harder to get, people are going to use other drugs. That's the way it is. That said, I'm against the use of all recreational drugs. I would like to see all of them down. I would especially like to see the most damaging ones down. And so one other thing, I think outdoor grows are very important because for the poor, they are the way to go. That's what they need.
Scott Owens, 10810 Justice Center Drive, Roseville. Gordy and I have been on the opposite end of a lot of lively discussions through the years. I got to tell you, I like this 3-minute rule a lot.
Although I have to insert, Scott, I'm encouraged to know that Gordon thought of this 100-mile race that horses used to do when he was sober.
I got a picture of him on the very first race. I've been quite vocal in expressing my opinion on this issue, and I'm confident that both the community that I serve and the board members, you board members, understand how adamantly I feel about the idea of allowing the marijuana industry and the criminal profiteers that come with it to invade our county like it has so many surrounding counties. We only need to look at the lessons learned in neighboring El Dorado County to know what we would be letting ourselves in for. El Dorado County Sheriff John D'Agostini, who originally supported El Dorado's friendly ordinance, but now says it was a big mistake that was intended as a compassionate action for local medical marijuana patients, but has attracted criminal profiteers who are ripping up public and private lands and cultivating plants on a scale vastly exceeding county guidelines. In a December 14, 2014 Sacramento Bee article, Sheriff D'Agostini claims pot seizures in his county would be enough for 1.7 pounds of marijuana for every man, woman, and child in El Dorado County. As this board moves forward, I hope that it keeps several things in mind. First, the more you make marijuana readily available, the more it's readily available for our children. All you have to do is look at what has happened in the states that have legalized marijuana. Colorado and Washington have rocketed up to the top of the nation in the area of usage amongst teens, and teens that are getting kicked out of school because of marijuana usage. Second, every city in our county has ordinances prohibiting commercial marijuana cultivation and dispensaries. We should strive for consistency throughout the county so we don't undermine the efforts of those cities. Third, I hope this board keeps in mind that this activity is still a violation of federal law. Despite what we heard from County Council's big point was we can't enforce it at the state level, but it can be and has been enforced at the federal level. Finally, any revenues will be far outweighed by the impacts on our environment and degradation of our public safety. This includes increases in crimes of violence and driving under the influence cases. I question the revenue speculation put before you in your memo. If you were to believe the memo, the more you open the door to marijuana, the more money you're going to make. And I think the memo states projections are between $5.2 million and $30 million if we deal with alternatives C through E, with the potential to exceed $15 million. I guess this is new math. Sacramento allows grows up to 22,000 feet. In a February 3rd, 2016 article, they told the Sacramento Bee that at a 4% tax rate, that was expected to generate only $1 million in revenue. Hard to see how we're going to get 15 times that. In addition, it's my understanding that if you took every crop grown in Placer County from wines to rice to mandarins, the revenue stream to our ag department is approximately $800,000. So when they write in the memo the potential to exceed $15 million, they're saying that the revenue stream from marijuana is going to be 20 times that of every other single crop in Placer County. Not sure I buy that. You know, from the beginning, it has seemed that there's been an effort not to find out what our community wants, but to point our community in a direction that I don't think that a lot of us agree with. We've heard from educators like our superintendent of schools, Gail Garbolino. We've heard from law enforcement, including our sheriff's office, myself, and the many police chiefs in our county. We've heard from elected officials, including California senators and United States congressmen. The message is clear. The people of Placer County are not prepared to get in the business of the commercialization of marijuana. However, apparently our opposition was not important enough to include or deserving of mention in the package that was presented to you. Like I said, from the start, it has not been an effort to educate our constituents and ascertain their desires, but an attempt to point them in a direction. This is not about medical marijuana. Nobody wants to deprive a medical patient who needs marijuana from that marijuana. Based upon my conversations with members of my community, educators, law enforcement, and fellow elected officials, we have prepared an ordinance that falls closest probably to Alternative A and submitted it for comment and for folks to take a look at. We believe that our proposed framework respects the Compassionate Use Act and allows patients or their caregivers the ability to obtain and cultivate 6 plants within 50 square feet in a residence. It completely bans the outdoor cultivation of marijuana. It bans dispensaries, and it bans the industry from making marijuana deliveries to our county unless it is by a designated caregiver. I'm strongly urging you to adopt the ordinance that we have proposed to preserve the beauty and safety of this county. Thank you.
Good afternoon, distinguished members of the board. My name is Ron Lawrence. I'm a resident of Rockland and proudly serve as their police chief. I've lived here in Placer County for more than 15 years, and I'm proud of our cities and our county. The safety of our public and the quality of life have always been and remain to be top priorities throughout Placer County and our local communities. I'm pleased to say that our local governments do a fantastic job preserving both. I join with my colleagues today, the Placer County Police Chiefs who I represent, Chief Daniel Hahn from Roseville, Chief John Ruffcorn from Auburn, and Chief Rex Marks from Lincoln, 2 of whom were here but had to leave early. I stand shoulder to shoulder, as do my other chiefs, with our district attorney, with numerous residents, nonprofits, school boards, and higher education, in urging the board to make a wise decision to preserve the future of Placer County. A lot is at stake in your decision. I applaud the board for taking the important steps to regulate medical marijuana, just as our local cities have done. I strongly urge you to enact an ordinance that is in alignment with the city ordinances already in place, which have been serving our medical marijuana patients, our cities, and by default, our county well. None of our local cities allow outdoor commercial marijuana cultivation, and none allow medical marijuana dispensaries, and it's similar to Alternative A. Recognizing that the Parker Initiative will be on the November ballot this year for California voters to consider recreational marijuana, that initiative, if passed, would still allow local cities and counties to ban all outdoor marijuana cultivation and dispensaries, but would prevent local banning of indoor grows of up to 6 plants for persons over 21 years old. The fact that this pending initiative still allows local control to include banning outdoor grows and dispensaries makes your decision today even more relevant. The decision you make on this agenda item will most certainly lay the foundation for any future regulatory allowances, and for this reason, I again strongly urge you to partner with your local cities and be in alignment on such important issues that affect all of us and all of our 370,000 residents. I support the proposed ordinance laid out by our district attorney, which you have a copy of, as do the other police chiefs. It is in alignment with the local municipal ordinances and does not allow outdoor commercial marijuana grows, and it does not allow for medical marijuana dispensaries, yet it provides for our medical marijuana patients. I realize the enticement of tax revenues from this all-cash business is alluring, but any tax revenue realized will pale in comparison to the detrimental costs from our public safety, safe roadways, quality of life, real estate values, environment, impact to our youth, and a variety of other issues. These are all qualities that make Placer County one of the greatest places in the state to live. Our communities depend on elected leaders, just as yourself, to set good policies to maintain a healthy and safe environment. I'm proud to say that our local city councils and our board of supervisors have always shown good leadership. I hope your decision in this matter before you today continues this good leadership. Thank you.
That's enough.
Was that for me?
Only if I did it personally, Dave, not.
Chairman Wygant, members of the board. My name is Dave Butler. I serve as vice mayor for the city of Rockland on the Rockland City Council. You might think of us as a municipal advisory committee representing about 60,000 people in the heart of Placer County. Supervisor Montgomery, I just want to friendly amend one of the things you mentioned earlier. You said that representative cities were mostly interested in this issue, how it impacts the cities. As you know from our work together, those of us representing cities, we're interested in the future of our county because we rise and fall as a county together economically, socially, and from quality of life. So we're here really interested in the concerns of the county as a whole. You're cutting into my time, Jennifer.
You'll get extra time. What I said was that the city's interests could be reflected in some actions that the board took. I didn't say the cities were only interested in the cities.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. I just want to thank Supervisor Wygant and Supervisor Holmes for your particular attention to Rockland's concerns. You've always taken time to listen to us and matters before the board. Also want to thank staff for your responsiveness. We greatly appreciate your interaction. I'm here representing Mayor Janda and other members of the council, and really, truly echo what Chief Lawrence just said. Encourage you to adopt the most narrow, most restrictive ordinances as you possibly can. And I'd just take a little different spin on it. My observations have been that there's so much in flux right now with this issue that it's really prudent and cautious to take a narrow, conservative view on this. I attended a meeting of, it's kind of funny, Bummer, the Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation. That's what it's nicknamed, Bummer. We attended a briefing at the state capitol, and I was alarmed by what I heard, but I also encouraged a little bit by what I heard. They have a staff of about 4. Statewide, they're expected to implement this. There won't be any revenues coming to the state to assist with locals in enforcement for a couple of years. They don't even have their regulations written yet because they're waiting in large part to get feedback from locals as to what locals want to do. So if we want to send to the state a message, implement a narrow conservative state regs, we might want to do the same thing at the local level. I'd also encourage you to look around. You, Sutter County, Yuba County, City of Sacramento recently did not pass a tax for the use of medical marijuana to fund youth programs, the City of Sacramento. So there isn't a significant amount of support around our communities for this type of lax, liberal regulation of medical marijuana. Finally, I just encourage you to listen to the voice of law enforcement, both local law enforcement and your county law enforcement and your district attorney, because let's face it, they're the ones who are going to deal with this one way or the other. And lastly, Jennifer, since you took a little bit of my time, lastly, I'd also, now you messed me up there, Jen. Oh, one last, revenue. Whatever revenue you get from this, it's going to pale in comparison to the costs that potentially impact our community in terms of public education, public safety, and our quality of life. So please don't be tempted by the dollars. Thank you.
Is this on? All right.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman Wygant and distinguished supervisors. Chairman Wygant mentioned early on to be brief and not be redundant. So in an effort to honor that directive, I will do that because I would.
In your life, you've ever paid attention to me.
That's a good point. But I would second a great deal of what we just heard from our DA and from our police chief and our other council members. And Supervisor Durant, I know you said early on in here in the meeting that you did. I think you were bothered by the cities telling the county what to do, and I want to apologize if that's the impression, because it's certainly not mine, and I can't speak for all my colleagues. I mean,
what I was most upset with is before the cities implemented their laws, they never talked to us about it.
Yeah, and that's entirely fair.
That seems to be a consistent
Right.
theme with a lot of the
with
a lot of the regulations that the cities
I agree.
do.
I agree. And I would say there's probably blame on both sides. I mean, we could all communicate better. I agree with you wholeheartedly. But we're here now, today. We got here. And I want to thank the staff as well for putting forth a great effort. It's been a little rocky, but again, we're here today. And I want to as well echo Vice Mayor Butler in that to listen to our law enforcement. We put a great deal of faith into our law enforcement's judgment. And as I see it, almost unilaterally, our law enforcement is supporting something along version A. And I too do that. And so I'm here not to tell the city or the county what to do. I'm here to ask you to please consider something like A, because that seems to me that's the common sense approach. I sat in your chair a few years ago in Rockland, where we had an ordinance come before us, and it's just like A. And we were faced with the same issues. And we're not here to, I could cite all kinds of statistics by why cannabis is good or cannabis is bad, and the federal law versus the state law. You've heard it all right? But from a common sense approach, back then, we had to make a decision too, and our decision was to regulate it as tightly as we could, because there were a lot of unknowns. I say there's more unknowns now, especially in November, that we don't know what's going to happen with recreational use. The common sense approach, at least I would be taking, would let's be most restrictive. Let's be most restrictive and see how things work. And Vice Mayor Butler also pointed out some of the other jurisdictions who have all voted that down. Well, goodness sakes, I love being the leader as a county. I love being the leader in innovation and a strong economy, but I'm not so sure I want to be the leader in something untested yet. So there's plenty of time to consider this at another date. I would recommend, please, consider the most restrictive. It's very similar to our ordinance, the one that the district attorney has presented as well. So, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Wygant, Board of Supervisors. I'm Bonnie Gore. I represent the Roseville City Council. And you've received a couple of letters outlining the city's concerns. And I would just like to reiterate that the city of Roseville is deeply concerned with the ultimate direction that could be taken by the county. And that could be a path towards commercialization and distribution. And I think that those things could have irreversible implications for our entire county, not just the unincorporated areas. And you've heard from our law enforcement officials who've shared their concerns about how marijuana availability could have a direct correlation to crime, to public safety, and our issues about how it would affect our youth. And although the city or the ordinance could tax production and distribution in the attempt to mitigate the effects to our community, I think the real question that we need to ask is at what cost? Just the other week, I had the opportunity to view the Made in Placer County video that city staff did a great job on. And that was actually premiered at the Economic Development Awards breakfast a couple of months ago. And it showcased a great place to work, a great place to live, a great place to recreate. That's what Placer County is, right? I think we can all agree to that. But then we look at something like this, and my question is, are those fees and those taxes, those aren't enough to mitigate the effects? And is our quality of life worth those taxes? I really question that. I think that's something that we really want to preserve. And I think the money is something we have to look at, because the problems that could occur from this, the money's not going to mitigate. There are going to be problems with law enforcement. There's going to be problems with public safety. The concerns we have with how it will affect our children. Those are the things we have to look at, because ultimately it's a quality of life issue for us here in Placer County. That's why people come to live here. That's why people build their businesses here. And so I agree that you need to have an ordinance, and I know that we have to allow people to have the medicinal marijuana, but I think we really need to look at limiting distribution and commercialization, because that really can affect our community. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chair Wygant, board members. Philip Escamilla on behalf of William Jessup University in Rockland, California. In the interest of time, we'd simply like to voice our support for the district attorney's proposal, and also want to align ourselves with the comments by Chief Lawrence representing other city police chiefs in the county, and also just our general support for a least restrictive model that would restrict the personal cultivation and oppose the commercial cultivation. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Courtney Hart. I'm a resident of Rockland, and I'd like to first off just say that I have nothing against medical marijuana use. I understand it's necessary for a lot of people. I do not use medical marijuana. I'm very fortunate to be a healthy individual. That being said, as a resident and parent in this community, I'm deeply, deeply concerned about the notion of commercial propagation of marijuana in this county. I moved here because of the schools, of the parks, and of the community values. And I fear that having commercial marijuana grown here would lead to growth in this area that it's no longer people like me wanting to come here. It's going to be people who want to come here and grow marijuana because they can, and they can get away with it because they might not be the 30 people that have permits, but no longer can a cop drive down the road and say that grove isn't right because maybe they have a permit. And that's really, you know, residents are not allowed to vote on this ordinance. We voted you. We trust that you know our values. We trust that you feel the same way that we do. And I trust that you'll make the correct decision. If it were me, I would vote for a conservative view, closer to alternative A with 0 outdoor groves. Again, I have a child, and I just, you know, I don't want any mix-up. I have 0 problem with medical marijuana and the people that need to use it. I don't think it needs to be grown outdoors. Thank you.
Chair Wygant and members of the board, my name is Wendy Gehrig, and I'm here on behalf of the Roseville Area Chamber of Commerce. Placer County has an exceptional reputation as one of the best places to raise a family in the nation. This was not achieved easily and promotes our safe communities and our thriving business environment. We need to choose what industries will characterize our county, and the Roseville Area Chamber of Commerce does not believe it's the outdoor cultivation of marijuana, but rather industries such as healthcare, technology, higher ed, tourism, ones that will provide higher paying jobs for our residents. The Chamber is supportive of allowing indoor grows for medical purposes, and to that end would most likely support alternate A. I did not see, or we did not have the opportunity to review the proposal submitted by the DA's office, but that probably is better than A. So with that, we would ask for your consideration. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Park. I'm a trustee for the Roseville High School District, and I'm here today because I value every student's life in our school district. With over 10,000 students, I pay particular attention to how those students perform academically in our schools. What we've learned is that drugs are not our friend. Therefore, more drugs would not be our friend either. I'm simply saying to you that the high levels of THC in marijuana make it a very different drug than it used to be. Used to be in the 70s, when I was a lot younger, that nobody thought too much about that stuff as long as it was on the college campus or someplace where the police didn't see it. But today, I'm finding out from my law enforcement friends, this product is radically different. I think one of the first reports I read was from Colorado. I thought it was an oxymoron when their name turned out to be the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Report. I just couldn't believe that anybody would name their report like that, especially when the content undermines every logical reason to disapprove, or approve, I should say, a marijuana ordinance or increased availability of marijuana. You see, their problems are so profound with kids. 12 to 17-year-olds are still developing their brain capacity, the mental acuity, the neuron paths that need to connect, and they don't have a chance if they get tied into an addictive drug like today's marijuana. 62% of the students that we expel today from the Roseville High School District are for either the possession of, the use of, or the sale of drugs. Oftentimes it's not marijuana, it's something else. But the pattern is there, and it's very dangerous for us to consider. I would like the county to please consider the costs of DUIs, driving under the influence, hospitalization, addiction, clinics, and all the treatment that has to go with it, expulsions, brain damage, lost economic costs, and the cost of the cities and the law enforcement for dealing with this new possible world that we're living in. I strongly encourage you to vote the most restrictive ordinance you possibly can, or to accept the recommendation of the district attorney of my city. I want to thank you again. And oh, by the way, There is a quick and easy solution to growing marijuana. It's called defoliation. I think you've probably heard of it. And today, I feel like that would be a good solution. Thank you.
Hello, Chairman and members of the board. My name is Micah Heilman. I'm a land resource scientist and a community organizer of the Protect Placer Coalition Against Commercial Marijuana. We're comprised of residents, parents, educators, firefighters, law enforcement, and community leaders throughout Placer County in all districts, in cities and unincorporated areas. We agree that Placer County needs an ordinance to clarify marijuana policy. However, we're deeply concerned about any ordinance provision legalizing commercial marijuana production or dispensaries in Placer County. This would have many negative consequences, as evidenced by other communities that have permitted increased marijuana production. Evidence from other counties and states shows that 4 things happen under permissive marijuana rules. The number of grows increases, the size of the grows increases, illegal grows do not decrease. There's little incentive for growers willing to grow illegally to come out of the shadows, and access by youth increases. Placer would be among the first of California counties to allow commercial marijuana when so little precedent has been set and when there are many consequences we cannot quantify. We understand one of the concepts the county has been investigating is enacting permissive structure, allowing a commercial industry so that it can be taxed. In reviewing the staff report, it's notable that 3 of the 5 alternatives include commercial marijuana cultivation and projected tax revenues. It's very concerning to our coalition that all 3 of these alternatives completely ignore the broad social and economic costs to a community that are shown to result from a marijuana industry in their cost analysis. This analysis also omits revenue in options A and B that could be generated from civil penalties through the enforcement of the code. It's unlikely that any amount of tax revenue can offset the negative social, cultural, and economic impacts of a permitting marijuana industry in Placer. Furthermore, the ballot initiative that will be seeking to legalize recreational marijuana in November still allows for counties to decide how they want to approach marijuana operations. Limiting them in Placer County now will prepare Placer County regardless of the November election outcomes. We need a clear ordinance that is protective of our county residents, and our coalition supports the ordinance that was developed by the district attorney. We increasingly feel the urgency of this issue. There is already ample evidence of marijuana interests from across the country buying land, applying for well permits, illegally clear-cutting our forest lands, and damaging our natural resources as they try to get ahead of the rules. We do not feel any additional investigation or pilot testing of commercial marijuana is necessary, and in fact, we think it is more likely to be misleading and harmful. We sincerely hope that Placer County can solidify a protective stance on this topic. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Gresham Gordon, and I am not a resident of this county. I'm a Northern California advocate. I have moved from Citrus Heights to El Dorado County, and I'm now in Tehama County. As a resident of Citrus Heights, I was injured. I am a youth agriculture leader, retired. I was injured at Cal Expo, and I watched the only dispensary in Citrus Heights close its doors in 2012 as I was injured at home. In moving to El Dorado County, I helped to construct the 2013 grow ordinance, and I actually grew legally to take care of myself in El Dorado County through a back injury. I was released in 2013 from Roseville Sutter after a spinal drain was removed. My doctor said I am not allowed to take pain medications anymore. I am that person who has been damaged by opiates, and I am not allowed to take pain medication. I was released without a prescription by my neurosurgeon. My brother was a carpenter for local 1447, is it, Roseville? His last project was Roseville Kaiser Hospital, where he installed those turquoise diamonds that you see on the top of the hospital. Unfortunately, Big Bear, my brother Barry, was an alcoholic. He finally drank himself to death down on Alta Arden as I was exhibiting with my youth group at Cal Expo. I was able to go over there and take care of my brother while taking care of my youth group at Cal Expo so cirrhosis could take my brother away from me. Cirrhosis took him in 2006, and cocaine took my other brother in Citrus Heights in 1992. I currently work with a Rockland resident who is an alcoholic who I desperately try to keep in safe access. He has no access in Rockland. He has no ability to drive. I have to drive him down the freeway into Sacramento or into El Dorado County where he can gain some access. So I'm here to ask you to go with alternative E. I'd even go above that. But I really want you to think about how much access to alcohol people have in this county. These people can walk anywhere if they don't have a license and get alcohol, but they cannot get cannabis in your county, legally anywhere. But I thank you for your time, and you guys have done a fantastic job. There's a lot of work. It's really been difficult, and I intend to take this information and move it north into Tehama and Shasta counties. Thank you for your time.
Chairman Wygant, members of the board, my name is Paul Joyner. I'm a resident of the city of Lincoln and also a Lincoln City Council member. Mr. Chairman, in respect for your wishes of avoiding redundancy, let me just simply endorse the comments of my fellow electeds and the comments of law enforcement personnel and the district attorney that were here today. What I thought I'd do, rather than be redundant, is share with you instead Lincoln's experience in putting an ordinance in place. I think most of you probably are aware that Lincoln's ordinance is very likely the most restrictive in Placer County right now. We have put a total ban on the growing and distribution of marijuana in the city of Lincoln. What you may not know is how we came to that. The year prior, we placed an ordinance, we supported an ordinance 5-0 that allowed for the indoor growing of medical marijuana in the city of Lincoln. That was restrictive. There were requirements for lighting and many other things. You had to register with the city and you had to allow for inspections. But it did create a pathway to legitimately grow medical marijuana. In a year's time, we had no applicants for those permits. That doesn't mean that there were no grows in the city. There were just zero applicants wishing to come out of the shadows, as we've heard, and participate in a legal pathway to be able to grow that. What's perhaps even more telling, there was not one single inquiry as to how to go about that. No one chose to even look into how they might legally grow medical marijuana in the city of Lincoln. And as a result, when the law changed and we were allowed to place a total ban on it, the council then voted 5-0 to ban that medical marijuana grow. So I guess what I'm saying is be forewarned, there are going to be compliance issues. Regardless of which option you choose, I'm going to strongly encourage you to go with the most restrictive you can. Option A, if there were something more restrictive, I'd suggest that as well. That's been Lincoln's experience. From what we hear from Josh, that's Sutter County's experience as well. Compliance is very hard to come by, even when you try to craft an ordinance to allow for that growth of medical marijuana. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name's Richard Lewis. I'm a resident of Super Wygant's district. Just a couple of issues. In the years I've lived where I'm at, we've seen a lot of people from outside the area, other counties that have become more restrictive, moving into Placer County. So I think we have an issue that needs to be addressed, and the sooner it can be addressed, the better it's going to be. The enforcement issue of whatever you vote and put in place, please make it as speedy as possible for everybody concerned. Because a lot of times we see enforcement officers or something, it will take months, 6 months. Let's say it's coming towards the end of the grow season, 60 days it's taken care of, you're automatically going into the next year. So whatever you put in place to enforce it, please act upon it quickly. Outdoor grows, I live on 10 acres. they're getting more and more in the area. More and more of my neighbors are being impacted by the smells, the pollution, other things going on in the areas. So please, whatever you do, restrict outdoor grows or limit them altogether. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Sam Burns. I am a attorney in Placer County. I represent a lot of cultivators. I'm also a resident of Placer County, District 5, about 5 minutes up the road. I first want to speak as an attorney and perhaps, hopefully, an answer to your question of 2.5 hours ago, Supervisor Euler, which what happens if one of Placer County's finest comes upon a garden that they find is maybe too big? It's not as simple as walking onto the property. Judging by hundreds of cases I've represented people on over the last 6 or so years in about 10 or more different counties, these law enforcement call for 6 or 8 backups, spend an entire day investigating, trying to get people to admit that maybe they did something wrong or maybe this isn't for their personal use. And of those hundreds of cases, 2 of them came to my desk where the person did not somehow admit doing wrongdoing, and one of those was dismissed. So it's not as simple as doing a law enforcement only approach at all. You can do it, lots of counties do, but it's expensive, it's time consuming, and idiots like me make a lot of money wasting your money trying to enforce it. I can also tell you as an attorney that since Calaveras enacted an ordinance about a month ago, pretty restrictive ordinance. You have to be a resident there already. There's very strict environmental permitting that goes with fees going along with it, very strict or very expensive permitting fee. I've gotten 4 calls from people in Calaveras County who do want to come out of the shadows. This is not like previous ordinances where there's a small process that kind of creates a new gray area. It creates as much of a black and white area to avoid that circumstance that I just told you about, Supervisor Euler, as it possibly can, or at least way more of one than it did before. The second half of my remarks, or the last third of my remarks, I want to shift to being a Placer County resident and a father of a 2-year-old. We've heard a lot about what's $1 million here and there for the enforcement on alternatives A and B. It's not a lot compared to the $800 million that we see in the general fund right now, but it's a hell of a lot when you're talking about my 2-year-old. Perhaps when I see headlines in the Auburn Journal every 3 months that one of her libraries might be closing, when I see that the Newcastle Fire Department was shut down a couple of years ago, it is a lot of money, and that tax revenue is awful enticing. I kind of win either way as an attorney, but as a resident, I support alternative E, because I think it gives a lot of people the opportunity to come out of the shadows and a great opportunity for Placer County to remain the best place in California, in the nation, and in the world to live, work, and play.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Trish Sweeney. I'm a field rep for Assemblyman Frank Bigelow. Assemblyman Bigelow represents the 5th Assembly District, which covers part of Newcastle and the city limits of Auburn. I'm going to read a statement from Assemblyman Bigelow now. Assemblyman Bigelow would urge the Board of Supervisors that if you are going to create an ordinance, that is to be a strict ordinance that has a complete ban on all outdoor cultivation, indoor commercial cultivation, dispensaries, distribution, testing, processing, and delivery. If the board has determined that some form of cultivation is necessary, the Assemblyman would urge you to consider enacting a land use ordinance allowing for qualified patients or caregivers to only conduct limited indoor cultivation in permanent structures detached from the residence. It is important to the Assemblyman that the ordinance also include requirements for all electrical and plumbing to meet county building department standards, and that an adequate odor control to prevent public nuisance. Due to concerns that have been raised by many of our constituents regarding youth access and the exposure to marijuana, the Assemblyman would hope that the indoor marijuana cultivation could be kept at least 1 mile away from any schools, churches, child care facilities, parks, or youth-oriented facilities. Above all else, the Assemblyman urges you to listen to the law enforcement leaders of Placer County and the district attorney and their opposition to the broad and permissive ordinance. It would be very detrimental to the citizens of Placer County to ignore the well-founded opinions and expertise of the law enforcement leaders in Placer County. Thank you for your time today.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wygant and members of the board. My name is Jennifer Horn. I am the Deputy District Director for Congressman Doug LaMalfa. I was here last month before the board with Christine Rydell from Senator Nielsen's office regarding a joint letter that was sent to the board from Congressman LaMalfa, Senator Nielsen, Senator Gaines, Assemblyman Bigelow, Assemblywoman Gaines, and Assemblyman Dolly regarding this ordinance. I'm here today to reiterate the Congressman's position on this issue and the detrimental impacts it will have on Placer County. It is important to remember that marijuana is still classified as a Schedule I drug and is federally illegal. States' allowance of marijuana use, medical or not, is at odds with the federal position. Those who are in the business of growing it, selling it, manufacturing it, etc., are committing a federal crime regardless of any state law. Banks are required to file a suspicious activity report on any financial transactions believed to be involved with the marijuana industry because those funds come from a federally illegal activity. A majority of guidances that are listed in the staff report came from presidential appointees for federal agencies. Most, if not all, are likely to be replaced regardless of who our next president is. And administrative guidance is not law and can be changed at any time. Congressman LaMalfa will continue to oppose the legalization of marijuana and believes federal agencies should impose federal law. The Congressman is supportive of a ban and urges for the most restrictive ordinance possible. Thank you so much for your time.
Good afternoon. Christine Rydell with Senator Nielsen's office. I brought with me copies of opposition letters that our office has received that the staff failed to include in their staff report to you. And in addition to the letter that Jennifer referenced, we also have letters from Gail Garbalina Mojica in opposition, Roger Stark, Superintendent of the Rockland Unified School District in opposition, Dr. John Jackson, President of William Jessup University in opposition, and also Francis Anfuso, co-senior pastor of the Rock of Roseville Church. Senator Nielsen, along with Congressman LaMalfa, is supportive of the most restrictive ordinance that the county has heard today, which is the district attorneys. And just one other additional comment, being that this is Placer County and it's known to be very difficult to get any tax passed, what happens if you approve an ordinance and you're counting on a tax revenue that never materializes? Thank you.
Good evening. Devin Bell with the Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff did intend on speaking. I have his notes, illegible. I'm going to attempt to...
We didn't know he could write.
He can write. I can't read it, but he wrote. I'll attempt to capture the spirit. We recognize, I don't think anybody in the room here disputes the relief that medical marijuana can provide to those who are sick or injured. We recognize that. What we're really talking about is what mechanism of regulation. So what we need to evaluate is the needs of the patient and have those balanced against the interest of the community. That's really what the whole discussion is about. When determining, I used to be you couldn't tell now, I used to be a wrestler. And we used to have to go weigh in, and you get on that scale with that 3-bar thing. You start on one side, and you tip that weight over until you reach the fulcrum, and that shows you balance. What we would ask, what we would recommend, we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with our elected district attorney and our chiefs of police. Start with the most conservative approach. We can always, over time, through evaluation, modify the approach as need be to find that appropriate balance. Thank you.
Thanks, Devin.
My name is Bobby Hawkins,
Excuse me,
and I live in
before we get
Sheridan.
started, unless there's a rebellion, I'm going to actually stop public testimony at the end of the line with the last fellow there. It's after 5 o'clock, and we've been here since, I can't imagine that there's anything new to say that we haven't heard already, and so if you want to hurt your cause and come up and say something, you're welcome to do that too, but we aren't going to stay here all night. Go ahead.
My name is Bobby Hawkins, and I live in Sheridan. Okay, I'm disabled, and I live on a fixed income. I own a house, and I have 1 acre of land. I have a 99 grow garden. Okay, I'm a law-abiding citizen, so whatever you decide, I will abide by. Okay. However, I've already put in a lot of money into this operation this year, this garden, and that's on the word that I got from you last year. I went to a meeting. You said you weren't going to do anything for 2 years. That was last year and this year. So I put in my garden on that assumption, and I know whatever that you decide today, you will, I'll have to abide with. But what I'm saying is I've already spent money on this, and I just hope that you could go with what you told me last year. All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is John Birch, and I'm a resident of Auburn, living over next to Foothill Market. You know, in listening to all the discussions here, nothing critically came up that's in the Constitution, and it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as long as you're not tromping on some of the other people. I really resent people that are employed by schools, the DA's office, and all that. They have a vested interest in it. They're getting paid by them. They don't go up and say that. Their manager isn't too happy with them. So, going down the list of looking at things, I'm not going to go into sad stories, and there are a lot of sad stories on this whole thing. But what you guys, I think, are going to be facing is this law is dynamic. It constantly changes. The feds are in charge, now the state's in charge. No, the supervisor's in charge. No, the city can do this and all that. Here is one critical item that is not getting out. There was a DEA manager at a lawsuit in Utah, and he was being badgered by the plaintiff's attorney. He looked at him and said, "What difference does all this stuff make? August 1st, it goes to a Class 2 compound." And they approached Hillary on the thing, and they said, "Do you know anything about this August 1st thing?" And she goes, "Yeah, and it's long overdue." So everybody's confused. And I don't envy you guys at all trying to make the decision. But an issue came out with the outdoor grow and the smell. If you ever smelled a carob tree versus a marijuana plant, I mean, if I wanted to be a jerk and somebody's doing everything with my marijuana, I've got a carob hedge sitting right there with a fan blowing right over to the guy there. But the very bottom line on the outdoor stuff, yeah, it has to be compliant and all the rest of it. They don't have money. They're sick. They're crippled. They don't have money. You can't pay PG&E bills. I know how they get around it, and I never will do something like that. But that's what we're doing, and I think this whole thing is causing a divide. I say, people, if you get too restrictive, it's going to go back to what it was like 10 years ago. I could see it going on now. And here's the states are clicking down, approving it. If the state said, no, there's just 5 states, or 1 state, California, that would be one thing. But we add to the states. We're over 20 states now. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for your time.
Yes, Chairman Wygant, members of the supervisors, and the county staff. My name is Donald Anderson, and I live in rural Auburn. And I'd like to get down to, real things. Back in April of 2004, on the 12th and 13th, I had a drug-crazed nut come in my house and meet me with my own gun. I escaped the first time. He came back, and all I had was my .22, and we met in the entryway, this drug-crazed nut. And he said, I'm going to kill you, you expletive. And I said, you're going to get a few too. To this day, I still wake up. And this was probably the progression of what went on. Now we'll get down to the real live world. About 2 years ago, my neighbor, about 1,500 feet to the south, and about probably 300 feet from another neighbor, had a nice outdoor grove of 99 plants. I look up there and I see 50 per square feet, 199 plants. That's a lot. The neighbor almost gagged when the wind was right from the odor. So luckily I was far enough away I didn't get anything. And now there's 4 beautiful, about 100-foot by probably 30-foot greenhouses sitting there. Nice, big, monstrous fence all around it. In the back, during most of the spring, there was a beautiful grow light. And I don't know what kind of power it took. And there are several. So here we are looking at this. And I would estimate that those 4 greenhouses, with my poor engineering, it's probably in excess of 10,000 square feet, depending on the width and my guess. And this bothers me a lot. The owner doesn't even live there, so I have no idea who's in the house. There's another interesting little thing, too, on the tax bill of his. Sometime during the last 2 years, his assessment went from about 400 and some thousand up to around 700,000. And the only change has been that 99 plants. I completely support what Supervisor Euler said and what our undersheriff said. Yes, they need, there are people that need the medical marijuana. I have no quibble with that. I would support alternative A or more restrictive. And I thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Steven Starner. I am a new landowner. I am also a new business owner here in Placer County. I am also opening a not-for-profit as well. So I'm already giving you guys my money, and I'm one of those people coming out of the woodworks here, okay? And I'd like to touch base on a couple of things. I've noticed a lot of government people here and a lot of government people speaking for more government people, but I don't think that the government speaks for itself. I think the government should listen to the people, and the people are here trying to make that happen. I'd also like to touch base on a few things that has been said here. I'd like to refute the nonsense that some people are protesting here. One man mentioned that pot is a gateway drug. We have plenty of upstanding citizens here right now that prove that it's not a gateway drug because they seem to have level heads. There was also, we have, where am I here? Excuse me, I'm sorry. It's also not toxic. There are 0 related deaths due to ingestion of pot. As for the lady who spoke earlier, about the smell, what makes her spiteful use of horse manure any less of an inconvenience than the pot being grown next to her? Pig farms, kiwi farms, vineyards all create smells that people aren't fond of, but we allow those. I feel as though we need to quit classifying these upstanding tax-paying citizens as criminals. We need to implement guidelines to help us remain legal, upstanding citizens. And that's really it. So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Shay Ritchie. I'm a Placer County resident. I am a medical marijuana cultivator. I've been cultivating Placer County for the better part of a decade. I'm proud to say that 100% of my product has gone to dispensaries all over California, helping those suffering from a wide range of ailments. I currently work exclusively with a total of 5 dispensaries, cultivating specific genetics that they are requesting. I've been operating in complete compliance with state law, further choosing to not participate in the full collective model, allowing me to expand further outside the scope of my own legal doctor's recommendation. This was a choice that I personally made in hopes of not creating any more disenfranchisement of the industry than what has already existed. I will be completely honest and state that there are many bad apples involved in my industry. They have used and abused every trick in the book to skirt around the law. But then again, so have bankers, hedge fund managers, and politicians. Every single industry has its bad apples. The entertainment industry has bootleggers or torrents to download. The alcohol industry has illegal distilleries. The fashion industry has knockoffs. If we're going to sit and attempt to label an industry off of all of the bad, what industry would actually be considered good? The Red Cross just got caught embezzling money from the tragedy of Haiti. We have legislation being voted right now to not allow lawmakers to receive pay if suspended due to 3 California senators being caught in illegal activity, running guns. If we have one of our presidential candidates being investigated by the FBI, what's going on? I fail to see why the good is overlooked by the bad, but unfortunately in our society it is. Of all of the bad that I just named, there are absolutely amazing businesses and people operating with honorable intent. If you choose to ultimately ban cultivation in Placer County, it will still happen. It will happen in an unregulated environment. With doctor recommendations, patients will be allowed to cultivate for personal or in a caregiver capacity. That is state law. It doesn't matter if you ban outdoor and force cultivation inside or if you allow both. You are contributing to a completely unregulated, untaxed, and untraced cultivation practice. This, in essence, will continue to allow my peers with criminal intent to continue their operations without any real significant effect on the black market. I urge you to allow licensed cultivators and dispensaries in Placer County. This is the only way that Placer County can control the industry. It is the only way that Placer County can help decrease the size of the illicit market. It is the only way that Placer County can really make a difference in availability to youth. If you create a fair and balanced system that gets patients to actively participate in, you will ultimately decrease the size of grows at home, which will really let you begin to weed out those operating with ill intent. Once the illegitimate operators are held accountable, the size of our illicit market will shrink, which will ultimately help keep it out of our youth's hands. You have the ability to not only choose how many license holders there are, but who they are. You can pick the cream of the crop in order to guarantee the businesses selected will be honest and compliant. You have the ability to craft your ordinance however you see fitting to Placer County. The county is in complete control of the direction of the newly established industry by the state. All right, I'll just finish with this.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I have a lot more to say.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wygant and Board of Supervisors, staff. Thank you very much for all the work that you've put into this. My name is Bruce Broadwater. I'm a resident of Granite Bay. I am a retired insurance executive. I've smoked marijuana every day since I was 14 years old. I retired when I was 58. I don't think it hurt my brain all that much. And with regard to the previous gentleman's statements, ditto. I won't be redundant. All the statistics that are thrown around that are pro or con come from a world of mutual ignorance. We haven't studied this at a scientific level. We rely on 1940s reefer madness craziness about how bad it is. It's a gateway. It's going to make everybody crazy. Or we're listening to hippie folklore that will cure everything all the time for everybody. I don't think either answer is the right one. I've owned a dispensary and I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, the result of a poor identification system. And I think that regulation is the way to control it. And the more you restrict, the harder it will be to get people to comply and the more resources it will take to reach that level. Because the first thing that happens with Alternative A is 4,000 people in this county are going to get what? Busted? Notified? Somebody's going to write 4,000 letters? Supervisor Uhler's going to make 4,000 phone calls saying we're going to ban everything here? There's not enough money to make that happen if you put that much regulation on it. Smarter would be go with what the state is doing, coincide with what they have studied and spent millions of dollars in trying to figure out how to do. Why be different? Look at the county map and see, weed maps will tell you how many people are in this industry, the growers, hydroponic stores, all of those that were up there, 40 different dispensaries, 40 different hydroponic stores, 4,000 grows. If we do a little math and say each one of those employs 5 people, those are all people that live in Placer County. And for those, I shouldn't say all of them. Yes, there are illegal people that come into this county, but by far, they are not the majority. They are not the largest problem. This young lady should not be threatened on her property. She should be able to pick up the phone, call somebody, and say, take care of that. They can't do it right now. They would have run away. They would have laughed at her. There is nothing to be done, and no regulation will solve that problem. But too much regulation will make it worse. The more you regulate, the more you drive the cost up, which statistics, I don't really like citing them, because if I had more time, I can tell you a story about statistics that will tell you I can make them say anything you want. I don't care if it's the sheriff, the district attorney, or if it's Mr. Hippie folklore. They can say anything you want. But the real story is told when you look at what the people are doing, what's happening in this county, and what is happening in the rest of the country. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Eli Beardsley from District 5, and I have a lot of things I could talk about, but I'm going to keep it to just the medical aspects of this. When I was about 12 years old, my mom got cancer. For the first time in my life, I realized that my mom could die, that I didn't have, invincible parents. And I think that that was something that really helped me to understand, okay, that there are serious problems in this world, and there are certain problems that you can work on fixing. I feel that medical cannabis is something that is very powerful in the right hands and for the right people. My IQ was 137 when I was, I think, about 12 or 13 years old, and it's 127 now. It has gone down maybe 10 points. I don't think that is because of cannabis. High CBD bombs, back rubs, skin topical treatments is something that you can take without having to get high. So for instance, my mother is a naturopathic doctor. She does not believe in taking any kind of drugs, whether they be narcotics from a pharmaceutical company or even cannabis. Because she got cancer a second time, she was willing to get a prescription. She sees Dr. Bannister in Grass Valley, who is a very well-respected doctor who goes above and beyond the normal procedures that doctors do, say, for instance, at some of these places where people say you can just go get a prescription. This might be some doctors that do that, but there are other ones that don't. And I really hope through the system we can try to weed out, the people who are not, being legitimate. So anyways, I am my mom's caregiver. I can only produce high CBD, low THC strains that can be made into topicals that she can take so she has no psychoactive effect of this. She has been able to cure herself of cancer the second time with absolutely no surgery or other drugs. She had a mastectomy the first time and had massive surgery and was able to recover that time. This time she was able to recover through diet and through medical cannabis. So I just really hope that you will pay attention to the people who really want to make this world a better place and use cannabis to help to do that the best we can. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
I'm AJ Steele. I'm a resident of Placer County. I live in District 5 under Jennifer Montgomery. I just wanted to state that I was on the behalf of a lot of people who couldn't make it here today that were in the interest of not having a ban in Placer County. But I do respect the idea of most of the Board of Supervisors aren't in the rural areas that fall under Montgomery. A lot of you guys are in Rockland and Roseville and Granite Bay, which are basically cities. And I think some of these alternatives could potentially work specifically for your city, but don't have to work for all of the county. I think all of these are fairly one-sided, and I feel like the agricultural department could come up with something better if Placer County sheriffs would work with them and help them to craft a better ordinance with the interest of the public safety being in mind for Placer County sheriffs. I understand that if you're a Placer County sheriff or if you're a DA, that having less people to arrest and prosecute would be a loss of income. So I understand them opposing it from that sense. If they don't have cases to prosecute for medical marijuana or whatever, that's less income and revenue for them. I don't really know if that's the reason behind it. I think it's also kind of weird that Senator Nielsen and LaMalfa sent some people out here to lean on our local Board of Supervisors to influence us as a small community of what they want us to do. Look, I don't know who sent them out here. Very, very interesting to me. Maybe getting the money from the Rice Commission gets them out here. But basically, I just want to say, if you do choose to do some kind of very restrictive ban, that keep in mind you may criminalize and civilly penalize 4,000 to 5,000 residents of your county who possibly voted for you. And on top of that, the gentleman who left, who said he has a 99 plant grow that he's put substantial money into this season, if you all of a sudden put him out of compliance and he has to get rid of all that, then you're throwing away all of his investment. And I ask that you give people like him a grace period to come into compliance as you guys figured out what it is you do or don't want to do. I would be really surprised if you came through with a definitive decision today. I feel like it's too all over the place, and I feel like you guys could use a lot more time to get a lot more input. As far as the tax stuff passing, maybe it doesn't pass. So perhaps the licensing fees, if it goes that way, should be expensive enough to cover the potential that we don't pass a tax in Placer County. If there's 4,000, 5,000 growers and we charge $500 to $1,000 per permit, there's $2 to $5 million right there to make up for the costs of the new agricultural admission department. And I also wanted to say that I thought the potential to make 15 million or whatever, I actually think that's a low figure, and I think there's a lot more money involved. To stop the green rush, I think we should do what Oregon or Butte County did, require it that you have to be a resident of Placer County for 10 years before you could go here and try to buy up a whole bunch of land and grow a bunch of stuff. I don't know if that's unconstitutional. I know some people want to start a business and move here, but that will stop our green rush. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time here today. My name is Pei-Chin Chang. I'm a resident of Placer County, just south of Roseville in District 1. I'm the CEO of a technology company. We make a cannabis oil testing device. And this helps patients determine exactly how much dose they have in their edibles. And in this position, I've spoken with hundreds of cannabis patients, and they only want one thing. They want safe access to marijuana. They want to know where they can get it from. They want to know if there are pesticides in it. They want to know if it's tested. So with a, I guess, alternative E, this allows these patients to be able to buy their product legally. They know it's tested, and they know it's safe for them. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so bring it back to the board. We are being asked to provide direction as it relates to regulatory ordinance development, as well as any direction as it relates to putting something on the ballot. And not that anyone up here is going to listen to me, but maybe one suggestion might be that we can start out with comments, and if board members kind of indicate where they gravitate on the alternative potential from A through E or something else that might be helpful to get a sense of where there may be a majority and kind of become more specific after that. So with that, Jack.
First of all, I want to thank our staff. And I'm very proud to be sitting here today because I think our staff did an outstanding job of getting out to the public, irrespective of what some people think our staff was directed to do. They did exactly what we asked them to do, all right, is to go out, ban the brush, talk to people, get all kinds of different perspectives on what we should do as a board. And I want to specifically thank Becky for your tenacity and for your ability to let bad comments and bad things just melt right off you. I think some of the things that you had to endure came pretty close to bullying. And it was very difficult for me to hear about, you know, some of the comments that were made, some of those comments made by some of our council people here today. You know, this has been very difficult for me keeping my mouth shut for the last 8 months while all of this discussion, takes place. Hearing, you know, there's this side or there's that side, or if you're on this side of the line, you're pro law enforcement. If you're on this side of the line, you're not. Folks don't know me very well, but I've been in a lot of different situations. I've served as a board member for Roseville Joint Union High School. I've led a community youth organization for 10 years. Thousands of kids and parents. My position here on the Board of Supervisors, my position as the Deputy Attorney General, where I had some really interesting clients that I had to keep behind bars. Some of the worst, and the folks in the back will understand when I say this. Aryan Brotherhood, Black Gorilla Family, MS-13, Sureños, Norteños. Had to keep those folks in jail, you know, and I can honestly say that under my watch, not one of them got out. So the characterization of, you know, pro this or pro that, I take a lot of offense to that. And I'm going to say that I really do have a disjoint here with our local law enforcement on this particular issue. I think for over the course of the last 20 plus years, we spent way too much resources and way too much time, talent, and effort chasing this thing. But conscious of the community in where we live, understanding that we have responsibilities to ensure, that we make good choices and make good decisions. So I'm going to be advocating for alternative D with no dispensaries presently, and that we utilize dispensaries that are already existing in other jurisdictions, or after a 3-year trial period, we decide that there is an access issue, that we create our own non-public dispensary and run it with a delivery service. And when I say delivery service, I know that there are jurisdictions out there that have implemented their own situation. Don't think for a second that you haven't added to the black market. If you're sitting there right now thinking that you haven't added to the black market, it's a fallacy, all right? You're just as much in this as we are, all right? For the better part of my adult life, he goes, I've tried to go after lawlessness, all right? As a regulator of Indian gaming, I've seen how regulations work to ferret out bad people and bad influences. So my two issues are patient access and making sure that our folks are protected. I think the patient access piece for me lies on, being very limited in what we do. I mean, as far as indoor grows, I get that. I think we should have a policy of trying to force things as much indoor as we can. And I think that right now, from what I've heard, a lot of those grows right now are going indoor. And I also think that a lot of folks are getting really confused by this idea of commercial. Commercial is anything over 100 square feet, all right? We're not talking fields and fields of marijuana in Placer County. We're talking just enough to take care of what we have to do here and then ship it out to some other place. As far as commercial activities go, I do think that there are technologies out there and that there are businesses out there that are legitimate, that aren't these honey oil labs that, where we see 4,000 or 5,000 propane tanks in lakes. And I think there are some legitimate folks like this gentleman right here that is in Placer County that is doing good work for this particular industry. And I think to turn our nose to that and say, oh, well, we don't want you around here in a state where we're losing jobs, job on top of job, and everybody complains about that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. My final comment is if you don't regulate this problem, you're for lawlessness. You're for the same stuff that we've had to deal with for 20 years. I want to do something about it. And I think alternative D is where we go. And if after 3 years it doesn't work, we find that it doesn't work for us, we're done with it. Or we modify it to make it better. That's where I'm at.
Thanks. Jim, do you want to chime in?
I'm unsure about the 10,000 square feet cultivation. Are you talking about indoor cultivation, manufacturing?
Oh no, I'm talking about some outdoor, because with D there is a cap on the number of outdoor grows.
And it's 10,000 square feet would be the maximum.
I think so.
Okay. I've studied this thing quite a bit, and I want to thank Becky and Josh for your unbelievable attitude of keeping working on this. I'm more concerned about the cities, and I'm concerned that if we put this to a vote of the people, the majority of the people would vote for alternative A. If we went to the vote of the people of Placer County, we would vote for alternative A. And that's where I am at. I'm aware of your concerns. You're right. You have to do it right, but I'd rather have a more conservative approach as we move forward with this. So that's where I am at this point, is on alternative A.
Okay, so I'm next in line. So I'd be remiss if I didn't, particularly as chair, thank staff for the unbelievable amount of work that they did, research. You've taken a lot of unfair arrows over the months. I take exception to the district attorney's comments today that your presentations were predisposed for a particular outcome. I know that you were trying to interpret direction from 5 of us up here, and we were in a fluid state on it, our positions were emerging as we were learning. So I want to thank you for sticking with that as chair. If things didn't go all that well today, you could blame me largely, because I did a lot of work trying to be in communication with staff to make sure that we were clear and that the political components were minimalized and that we could sink our teeth into the substantive stuff. Philosophically, I'm aligned today more with A, and it's not because I don't have respect, Jack, for the work that you've done and the philosophy that you're pursuing. I want to provide for access for medicinal use in California, so I want that, or excuse me, in Placer County, so I want that factored in. I think the reason that A is the best alternative today, keeping in mind that I see this as continuing to emerge. I can easily see the county's position needing to change on this, even to accommodate the testimony that we've heard that's been most stringent from public protection, and sharing the concern with them. I think there is no one that I have spoken to on this board or at staff or professionally in any part of this whole last 12-month period when we started with me trying to get urban grows out of Sheridan, that didn't share the concern that we need to regulate in a way that dramatically minimized access of this drug illegally, but particularly to the adolescent population. And that's a concern that I still share, and I think all of us do. So whatever we do, I think we should emphasize that. I think it's important at this point in time that we align ourselves as closely as we can with our city partners. I think we should attempt to emerge in this whole process as much as we possibly can together. I would like to see staffs of the cities and the county reach out and attempt to do that. I think, frankly, some of the things I've heard that are legal research has actually enlightened some representatives along the way from the other jurisdictions. So either some of us may have been wrong along the way, and I want to know which one that is. But as we build consensus, I think we're going to find better solutions. On the cost issue, if it's as bad as staff indicates, I'm frankly not concerned about that at this point. I do think that that can be mitigated, though. I cannot believe, based on the personal experiences I've seen in the sites visits that I've done, that we can't work at least in partnership with the sheriff, and I'm happy to talk to Ed, he's a close friend. But it seems to me if we add as a part of their responsibilities this issue, certainly there would be cost savings. It wouldn't have to go out to a bunch more FTEs. And I worked with the deputy sheriffs when I actually did these site visits, and I know that there's a huge amount of expertise within the Placer County Deputy Sheriff's group that can actually help us and give us guidance. So I want to finish all of that by saying that I am not comfortable today launching into regulation that would help us manage a commercial grow production or distribution industry in Placer County. It's, in my view, a huge new business startup that I would like to see, if we have to, see others attempt before we do that. And if we go in that direction over time, I think it's essential that to the fullest extent possible, we have city partnership and so that we have a countywide solution. I understand the financing and how all that works, but I also know that there is a huge demand for this industry. I do not support the recreational legalization of marijuana personally. If we end up getting there, I hear and see massive amounts of investments that could be made. And I guess I want to be absolutely certain that if we end up in that direction, that we are really well honed in having high-functioning regulatory process that does the best we possibly can to protect our citizens in the public protection process. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jennifer.
Thank you. There are many things that can be said about me, one of which is that I can count. I know where Supervisor Euler is going to come down on this. I frankly would have gone for alternative C with some changes to it. I would have allowed mixed light outdoor growth. I would have allowed indoor and outdoor personal cultivation. I would have suggested it be prohibited in residential zoned areas. And I would have suggested a number of other modifications to it, including, a minimum lot size, things like hook up appropriately to electrical and water, and a number of other things. However, we have a D without dispensaries, we have an A, we have an A, and we have a no. So I like to live in the real world. My suggestion, and I'm hoping that I can convince Supervisor Holmes and Supervisor Wygant of that, is we look at some combination of A and B, which would allow for personal cultivation. I would suggest we allow caretakers to cultivate. I would suggest we allow some restricted outdoor cultivation, again, so we don't create situations where people who maybe can't afford grow lights in indoor grow situations, the opportunity to grow the medical marijuana, to which we all agree they really are entitled. And again, I would suggest that we put some parameters around it, similar, again, as we did to the hen ordinance. Got to be closer to your house than your neighbor's. Has to be not visible from the street. Again, as I say, unlike hens, they don't roam, but, perhaps they have to be surrounded by a fence so they can't be seen by your neighbor. I would, under personal cultivation, I think most of the issues around residential have been resolved by the actions that the cities have taken, but I would frankly encourage us to look at our own residential zoning to figure out how we don't create uncomfortable situations for the people who live next to personal cultivation. I happen to hate the smell of marijuana. That's my choice. I have many friends who love the smell of it, but I don't want to suggest that we ignore the needs of neighbors. So I would strongly suggest, if my board is willing to consider it, that we take a look at alternative B. We do allow caregivers to grow. We do allow some outdoor use, but we do put some parameters on it as well, rather than just saying, anybody can grow 50 square feet or 100 square feet wherever they want. So those are my thoughts and my suggestions. I also want to take the opportunity to thank staff. You guys did an absolutely incredible job in bringing this forward. I know that my municipal advisory councils, you went to 6 of the 7 that I have in the 5th district. Very impressed by the presentation you brought forward. Not all of them agreed with everything you had to say, but they thought that you guys brought forward a very fair, a very considered, a very reasonable set of parameters and expectations. I think all 6 of the MACs said, yes, let's go forward with some sort of ordinance that controls this. I think some of them are going to be disappointed by the action that we're taking today. And frankly, just one of the things that I heard consistently, not just from my MACs, but from people within the communities that I represent, is there is a train coming at us. And we can either figure out how to buy a ticket and get on that train and have some control over what happens, or we can be run over by it. I am personally concerned that by going with A or B, we're going to be run over by this. I think the state is going to get so far ahead of us that we're just going to be collateral damage. But there you have it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Montgomery's presupposition of my position notwithstanding, though my personal preference would be for an outright ban, I have heard the voice of my colleagues, and therefore I would move that we direct staff to come back with an ordinance consistent with Alternative A, to work with the cities to bring back an ordinance that most closely aligns with current city ordinances and also any appropriate elements of the district attorney's proposed ordinance.
Okay, and then,
The district attorney's proposed ordinance, as I recall, actually does allow cultivation by caregivers.
it does.
So that would allow caregivers to cultivate for individuals with medical marijuana licenses. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I, in light of the scale and scope of this and all the time we've spent here, if anyone has some final comments before we vote on the motion, I want to provide for that so that they can be incorporated at least into our mindsets, because I'm going to make some as we go forward with this particular.
I would just ask if Supervisor Euler would be willing to allow some limited outdoor growth.
No. No, my motion would keep it consistent with A.
No, I think it's been a very good discussion. It's been very emotional. I think we've done the best job that we could as a county to get out to all of our jurisdictions. And, you know, whatever we decide, you know, that's the way it's going to be. So I want to thank everybody for their input, irrespective of whether your input, you know, whatever it was just a pleasure to know that you had input on this particular issue. It didn't matter whether or not you agreed with me or not. It's the fact that you took the time to tell me what you thought, and that's what's important. The difficult job of this job is getting to a point of distilling all of the information that you get and trying to get to a point where you can make a decision that you feel is, number one, well thought of, and number two, does what it needs to do with regards to the public. So, thank you.
And I want everybody to know that I didn't take this position lightly. I spent a lot of time reading staff reports, newspaper articles, magazine articles. I even got Weedland, the book that Peter Heck from Sacramento Bee wrote, that explained how we got to this point. And I want to thank the audience for being so respectful and coming forward with your thoughts. And again, and want to thank the staff as well. But I didn't come in here and just make a decision. I spent a lot of time on this. Thank you.
And Chairman Wygant, just my last comment on this is that I think without allowing for some sort of outdoor grow, I will not be able to support the motion. I think it puts people who are on a fixed income at a serious disadvantage in terms of cultivating their own medical cannabis. And I think we would be doing a disservice to those individuals.
And I would support, you know, going in a direction that added a little bit of outdoor as well with that regard. So for the same reasons that Jen contemplates.
So, first thing I want to do, agreement I made with staff was check in to make sure, assuming this motion passes, do you have the direction you need to come back with us with an ordinance proposal? Is there further clarity that you would like from us? And before you answer that, you might, the way I see things is there's pretty clear definition in the motion, but it's not explicit. So for example, as we've discussed, examples A through E were only examples. There's probably literally an infinite multitude of combinations that the board could have considered in drafting something of our own. So in that the motion included considering elements that were in the district attorney's proposal, then I'm receptive to hearing other elements that staff might feel are important considerations, because we've gone from an arena that looks something like this to actually, in my view, being very specific, and I think we can, at the next hearing where we consider this, winnow down any particular pieces that three of us may think should be in or out. And so with that, do you have any concerns or questions, or would you like further clarity on a particular thing?
Well, a couple things I think we could use some additional guidance on, and we could come back to your board in the future with some options within these areas, and then we could get further direction from you then. But I think one thing on the, as we have discussed, and I'd say learned from all of our studies, is that any enforcement activity needs the enforcement activity behind it to make it effective. So I think with alternative A, just wondering what our thoughts would be on staff and how we should go about planning for an enforcement approach. And I don't know if, if we receive direction to work with our law enforcement partners and determine how that might best work, and then come back on that. And then also on that outdoor guidance, I mean, there have been, we've kicked around many of those types of things before. I mean, there could be things as simple as a very minor allowance for someone to have a plant or two on a back patio or something like that. So if something like that would be of interest to your board, we could develop a few recommendations around those sorts of things to get to some of the concerns expressed by Supervisor Montgomery.
So, as the maker of the motion, Mr. Chair, I will be more than happy to clarify my intent. And of course, my colleagues can vote as they see fit. I chose alternative A because it does not provide for outdoor grows. That's specifically why I chose alternative A. So no, I'm not interested in the outdoor grow, or the outdoor cultivation part of it. As far as the enforcement is concerned, I leave that up to our law enforcement professionals upon whom we have historically relied for regulating this activity. And if the Sheriff's Department, in concert with our folks in code enforcement, feel that additional staff might be necessary for successful enforcement, I'm open to hearing about that. I don't think, quite frankly, it will be as significant as what has been portrayed, because we're already spending a lot of dollars on folks, but unfortunately they're kind of operating in a vacuum right now, so hopefully this provides a little more clarity. So that's what was intended by my motion.
Okay. All right. We have a motion. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Aye.
No.
Holmes?
Aye.
Montgomery?
No.
Wygant?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, thank you all for your participation. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.